Chapter 161. Even Jishio, who was destined to be alone, was shocked by Tang 36's sincere attitude. He looked at Tang 36 and wanted to say something, but he didn't. But the look in his eyes made Tang 36 feel a little hurt, because when he looked at Zhuang Huanyu or other students in the Heavenly Academy, his eyes were probably like this. He knew very well that this kind of look was used to look at idiots. If you think I can't do it, what about Qin Changsheng? I told you before, this guy is very similar to you, both afraid of death and picky about food. You chew rice 12 times? Ha! He's a monster that needs to chew 20 times. In the vast sea of people, it's not easy to find someone so similar to you. Shouldn't you cherish him? Tang 36 waved his arms and said excitedly. Jishio still didn't react and continued to eat the food provided by Li Palace. He felt a bit helpless and pointed at the mountain-like Yao youngster and said, "If you think humans can't be trusted, then I strongly recommend Xian Yuanpa. Honest and sincere, the best in the world." Jishio still ignored him. "You're forcing me to use my most powerful magic tool." Tang 36 said, "Okay, you're quite famous. It's worth it to make Princess Luo your friend. How about it? I think you can't find a better friend. You and she are both ladyboys. No, Yao people, your background and problems are similar. If you become friends, you won't get many benefits from Princess Luo, but at least you can help each other when you're in trouble, right?" At this moment, he didn't look like the aloof young master of Wenshui. He was completely an excellent merchant selling goods. After hearing Princess Luo's name, Jishio finally raised his head again and looked at the forest. His eyes were a bit complicated. No one knew what he was thinking. Just when Tang 36 thought he could do something, Jishio said slowly, "I don't need friends. Only a lonely person can be strong." Hearing this, Tang 36 didn't get angry. Instead, he calmed down and became serious. He stared at Jishio's eyes and said, "Wolves are never as lonely as people think." Jishio stared back at him. His eyes were slightly sharp. Tang 36 continued calmly, "The reason why you're lonely is because you're not accepted by your people." Jishio's gaze suddenly grew cold, like a blade dyed in frost. Tang 36 acted as if he didn't see it and said, "Wolves always fight as a group, don't they? After finding out that it was you, many examinees have been guessing as to why you would leave the snowy plains and travel such a long distance to the capital to participate in the grand examination. Qin Changsheng believes that you are not satisfied with being pushed down to second place by Her Highness upon the proclamation of Azure Clouds. So you want to defeat Her Highness in the grand examination in order to redeem yourself." Jishio creased his brow at these words, apparently rather surprised by the Orthodox Academy's wariness of him. Tang 36 continued, "Before Su Mo Yu was heavily injured by you, he had also said that he believed that you simply enjoyed battling, and that the grand examination provided you with this opportunity." Jishio looked at him and asked, "You, what do you think?" Tang 36 said, "Qin Changsheng's worry is reasonable, but it's not enough. Otherwise, in these 2 years, you would have already gone to Holy Maiden Peak to cause trouble for Su Yurong." Jishio shook his head and said, "I can't beat her." Tang 36 was startled, but didn't pursue the issue and continued, "I also don't believe that Su Mo Yu's guess is correct. Even if you enjoy battling and want to improve yourself through battle, it's still a battle where life and death are determined. In your eyes, the grand examination should be no different than a game. How attractive can it be to you?" Jishio used silence to express his agreement. "Then what exactly do you want? Why did you come to participate in the grand examination?" Tang 36 looked at him and said, "Tell me, maybe I can satisfy you. I don't want friends." Jishio's speech was still extremely slow, making it painful to listen to. He looked into Tang 36's eyes and said, word by word, "I want money." Silence. A light breeze blew on the edges of the oiled paper, making a rustling sound, and the greasy smell of roasted chicken was somewhat dispersed. Tang 36 didn't say anything for a long time, because he was shocked. He had left the woodlands to speak with Jishio. He had naturally made ample mental preparations. No matter what Jishio wanted, no matter how strange it was, he wouldn't be surprised and would even be willing to get it for him. Chen Changsheng wanted to obtain first upon the first banner, so he needed Zhixio's help. For this, Orthodox Academy would be willing to pay any price. But he couldn't have imagined that Zhixio wanted money. Within the younger generation of the continent, Zhixio was undoubtedly the coldest and most arrogant youth, but what he wanted was the most tacky thing in the world. Tang 36 used a long time to confirm that Zhixio wasn't joking and was speaking from the bottom of his heart, which made him even more shocked. Money? Yes, I want money, a lot of money. Why? Zhixio didn't answer. A light breeze blew on the oiled paper. The roasted chicken gradually cooled down. Tang 36 also calmed down, looked at him, and said, I have a lot of money. Zhixio said, I know. Tang 36 asked, how much? Zhixio said, depends on the situation. Tang 36 was silent for a moment, then said, deal. Zhixio looked at him, his expression indifferent, and said, I also want a few things. I hope you can give them to me. Tang 36 frowned and asked, do we have those things? Zhixio said, we do. Tang 36 stared at his eyes and said, so, your goal in participating in the grand examination from the beginning until now was Orthodox Academy. Zhixio said, yes. Tang 36 asked, is it your highness or someone else? Zhixio said, it's not you. Tang 36 understood. Zhixio had come for Chen Changsheng. He thought for a moment, then said, he really wants to place first upon the first banner, so I think as long as you don't want his life, then I can give you anything. Zhixio said, I don't want his life. Tang 36 nodded and said, then let's do it this way. After the results of the lots are out, we'll discuss what to do. Zhixio didn't respond, but asked, can it be eaten? His gaze fell upon the roasted chicken. Returning to the woodlands, seeing the gazes of Chen Changsheng and the other two, Tang 36 didn't have time to say anything. He first picked up the teapot and poured 3 cups of warm tea. Chen Changsheng then noticed that his back was completely drenched in sweat. His forehead was also full of sweat. He quickly took out a handkerchief from his sleeve and handed it over, asking, what happened? Zhixio was famous for being cold-blooded and ruthless, but what kind of person was Tang 36? He naturally wouldn't be scared to this extent. I was scared. Tang 36 used the handkerchief to wipe the sweat off his face, looked at them, and said with a face full of lingering fear. Chen Changsheng was a bit speechless. He thought to himself, what did Zhixio do to scare you? I never thought that this wolf cub was actually a money grubber. Tang 36 looked at them and said, he specially emphasized the word death. Not only did he want money, he was also a money grubber. How is that possible? Luo Luo and Xin Yuan said in unison. They came from the Yao domain. There were more rumors about Zhixio there. They couldn't believe Tang 36's words. He really wants money. Tang 36 was a bit annoyed and said, if you don't believe me, wait and see. Chen Changsheng thought about it and asked, apart from money, does he want anything else? Yes, he also wants something from you. Tang 36 said, you promised him? Chen Changsheng didn't know why, but he felt a bit nervous. Tang 36 said matter-of-factly, it's not like he wants your life. Why wouldn't I agree? I don't think there will be a second chance like this. Chen Changsheng felt a bit helpless and said, you don't even know what he wants. How can you agree for me? Tang 36 asked back, do you want to get first upon the first banner? Chen Changsheng didn't even think and said, it's not that I want to get it, it's that I must get it. Tang 36 said, if that wolf cub doesn't help, how many chances do you think you have? Chen Changsheng looked towards a stream bank and saw that Gohan Shi was talking to his juniors. They were probably discussing the previous 2 battles between Guan Fei Bai, Qi Jian, and Zhixio. Looking at Gohan Shi's expression, he was probably giving guidance to Guan Fei Bai and Qi Jian and not trying to get anything from the battle review. He looked towards Tang 36 and answered with some uncertainty, 30%? Tang 36 looked at him and sneered. Can you be any more shameless? Be more respectful to my master. Luo Luo said unhappily and turned towards Chen Changsheng. She said uneasily, 30%, isn't a bit too much? Tang 36 laughed out loud, causing many examinees to look at him. Chun Chong Sheng spread his hands and said, "Fine, if I go against Go Hansher now, I don't see where my chances are." Luo Luo said, "If I can go against him in the next round, perhaps my master's chances will be higher." Tang 36 shook his head and said, "You have to let Xiao fight against him again. Only then will you have a chance." Chun Chong Sheng asked, "But the drawing of lots might not go according to our plan." "It doesn't matter if Xiao draws someone else. He is now like Her Highness, responsible for helping you clear your opponents." Tang 36 said, "He and Her Highness are the two door gods for you to get first place upon the first banner." Hearing the words door god, Chun Chong Sheng remembered the pitch-black space underground, remembered the two legendary divine generals on the stone wall, and remembered the black dragon that was chained up. He suddenly felt a lot of worry. "Isn't it a bit inappropriate to be distracted at this moment?" Tang 36 said angrily. Chun Chong Sheng said, "Continue." Tang 36 said, "What I want to say is to be able to turn Xiao from the most dangerous enemy to the most powerful helper. Any price is worth it." Chun Chong Sheng thought about it and said, "That's reasonable." Tang 36 continued, "So you have to thank me. Not everyone can convince that wolf cub. Talking to him takes a lot of effort and energy." Chun Chong Sheng said, "Thank you. Don't you think you guys are thinking too much?" Xin Yuanpo looked at him and said, "First you have to defeat your own opponent. It could be Zhuang Huanyu, it could be Zhong Hui, or even Go Hansher in the next round. If you can't win, even if Xiao is willing to help, it has nothing to do with us." The woodlands were dead silent. Tang 36 was a bit annoyed and said, "Children that are too honest always say things that make people angry." Xin Yuanpo was unconvinced and said, "That's because honest children speak the truth." Chun Chongsheng looked at the crowd and saw Xiao sitting on a rock, silently eating chicken. "Then let's just leave it like this. Let's wait for the results of the drawing to come out. Also, next time, let's get him a whole chicken to eat. It looks so pitiful." 1. The punch that Chun Chongsheng gave to Huoguang was obviously from Street Fighter. There are only 4 games that I know how to play in my life: Double Dragon, Street Fighter. I can choose between planes and helicopters, Triangle State, this boring life. 2. The results of the Longevity Cup competition have already been announced at the top of the book review section. Currently, there are still 4 winners that we can't contact because we need a shipping address. So, please contact our hardworking sub-editor. I beg you. 3. Everyone needs to be well. For there were 2 songs in this chapter. Aside from the Powertrain song, there was also the ringtone of Crazy Rock Li Dao's phone. Old Wolf was treating me to chicken. Old Wolf was Tang Tang, and Little Wolf was Zhixio. Roasted chicken was meaningful to me, and it was even more meaningful to Zhixio. 5. See you tomorrow. Chapter 162. What did Zhixio want? This was what Chun Chongsheng wanted to know the most. After careful thinking, he confirmed that he wasn't mistaken. Upon entering the education palace, Zhixio had indeed turned his head to look at Luo Luo. It was because of that glance that he felt this wolf tribe youth was extremely dangerous. Who would have thought Tang 36, carrying a roasted chicken, had bribed him into becoming a helper for Orthodox Academy? This indeed sounded ridiculous, but really happened. Luo Luo was also looking at Zhixio. Her emotions were a bit complicated. For the vast majority of young cultivators, the grand examination could be said to be the most important event in their lives. But for some, the grand examination was only an opportunity to exchange for what they truly wanted. In other words, the seemingly sacred and solemn grand examination was actually an auction. Tian Haisheng Shui's withdrawal and Zhixio's agreement to Orthodox Academy's deal were all due to this reason. What about Chun Chongsheng? She clearly knew that he didn't have any desire for fame. So why did he have to place first upon the first banner? She had asked him before. Tang 36 had also asked, but he had never given an answer. The dueling matches proceeded smoothly. Tang 36 easily defeated his opponent. Xin Yuanpo's luck wasn't bad. He didn't encounter any experts on the proclamation of Azure Clouds. He also smoothly won. Considering the results of the academic exam, Xin Yuanpo's chances of entering the 3 grades were still uncertain, but Tang 36 had no problems. The following matches of the top 8 were also decided by drawing lots, but since there weren't many people left, they were split into 2 groups. One drawing of a sword would determine the order of the subsequent matches. The result of the drawing was Luo against the youth from Scholatry Manor, Zhonghui, Gohan Shi against the girl from Holy Maiden Peak, Zhixiu against the student from Star Caesar Academy, and Chen Changsheng against Zhuang Huanyu. 2 of the 4 matches were internal battles. Lishan Sword Sect and Holy Maiden Peak were from the same sect. Zhixiu was participating as a student from Star Caesar Academy. This didn't fit with Tang 36's plan. In his opinion, the best result would be Zhixiu against Gohan Shi, Princess Luo against Zhuang Huanyu, and the second group would have Zhonghui against the student from Star Caesar Academy, and Chen Changsheng against the girl from Holy Maiden Peak. This way, even if Gohan Shi defeated Zhixiu, he would still have to contend with Princess Luo. After 2 consecutive battles, no matter how strong Gohan Shi was, his legs would go soft. On the other hand, Chen Changsheng's skin was thick and his flesh thick. Comparatively speaking, his chances of winning against the young girl from Holy Maiden Peak was the highest. If he was able to surpass Zhonghui, he might actually be able to obtain first place upon the first banner. And now, Gohan Shi only needed to win that match against Zhixiu to advance to the final battle. It was very obvious that the girl from Holy Maiden Peak was no match for him. Of course, this method of drawing lots also had its benefits. Chen Changsheng only needed to defeat Zhuang Huanyu to enter the finals. This was because Luo should be able to defeat Zhonghui, and when she faced Chen Changsheng in the next round, she would definitely forfeit. The first match to begin was Chen Changsheng versus Zhuang Huanyu. In today's grand examination, Zhuang Huanyu was as silent and low-key as Tian Haisheng Shui. But Tian Haisheng Shui's silence and low-key was because he had already made preparations to withdraw from the competition, while Zhuang Huanyu's silence and low-key was in order to advance a little further. Not to mention, he hadn't met an opponent in the previous rounds that required him to display his abilities. Zhuang Huanyu is extremely famous amongst the younger generation of experts on the continent. Ranked 11th upon the proclamation of Azure Clouds, he was the person with the highest ranking amongst the Ivy League academies in the capital and the pride of Heavenly Academy. Aside from the top 3, the difference in strength between those in the first half of the proclamation was extremely small. He was definitely the strongest opponent that Chen Changsheng had ever faced in his matches. The Tower of Purging Dust was very quiet. Zhuang Huanyu looked at Chen Changsheng with an expressionless face and said, "Your luck today isn't bad." From the first round until now, the strongest opponents that Chen Changsheng had faced were Huoguang and that youth from Shuang City who was ranked 20th upon the proclamation of Azure Clouds. They sounded strong enough, but with the number of experts participating in today's grand examination, he hadn't met anyone from Lishan Sword Sect, nor had he met Zhixiu's group. From a probability perspective, his luck was indeed not bad. "Your luck is also very good." Chen Changsheng looked at him and said. This was also the truth. From the start of the dueling until now, Zhuang Huanyu had never met an opponent of his level. In terms of luck, neither Chen Changsheng nor anyone else could compare to him. This was no longer a matter of luck. It was definitely due to someone within the orthodoxy tampering with the drawing of lots. Heavenly Academy was the leader of the academies under the jurisdiction of the orthodoxy. Regardless of what Mao Qiuyu or Vice Principal Zhuang thought, the orthodoxy would definitely send out a representative student, especially with Orthodox Academy showing faint signs of revival in the recent half a year. The orthodoxy naturally wouldn't allow Heavenly Academy's glory to be completely stolen away. For 2 people with great luck to meet, I think we shouldn't be able to continue relying on luck. Zhuang Huanyu looked at him and said. They couldn't continue relying on luck. They could only rely on strength. At this moment, the Li Palace clergyman hosting the dueling asked from upstairs, "Are you ready?" Zhuang Huanyu nodded his head. But Chen Changsheng shook his head, and then he did something that no one expected him to do. He walked back to the eaves of the tower, took off the new leather whips from his feet, then placed them below the stone steps, arranging them very neatly, as if he was visiting someone else's home. Within the gloomy room on the second floor, a few soft gasps could be heard. Mo's elegant eyebrows slightly raised. Her face was expressionless, but deep within her eyes, there was an extremely faint hint of a smile. Prince Chenlu had been secretly observing her expression, especially every time Chun Changsheng appeared. Seeing her current reaction, he couldn't help but feel even more puzzled. Chun Changsheng once again returned to the arena barefooted, the edges of his feet bringing with it some yellow sand. He raised his right hand, grasping the hilt of a short sword at his waist. Following this action, the tower became even quieter. The personages within the second floor's room didn't say anything, but their gazes brightened and their expressions became slightly more solemn. Previously, when he defeated the young expert from Shuang City, Chun Changsheng still hadn't drawn his sword, relying on the strange and unpredictable discerning steps, ultimately relying on speed and strength. But it seems that he had already made preparations to draw his sword for this match. It seems that, facing a strong opponent at Zhuang Huanyu's level, he could no longer hold back. There was still no one who believed that he could defeat Zhuang Huanyu. Although he had displayed unimaginable power and speed in the previous few matches, and even had that strange discerning steps, the time he had successfully completed his purification was too short. The amount of true essence he had was too little when compared to a true expert, and he could not see any chance of victory. The most fundamental problem was Zhuang Huanyu was truly very strong. Are those who wear shoes afraid of those who are barefooted? Zhuang Huanyu's gaze fell upon Chun Changsheng's sand-stained bare feet. After a moment of silence, he said, "Perhaps you don't understand. Back in the countryside, I rarely had the chance to wear shoes, let alone new ones." Chun Changsheng didn't say anything, but he clearly knew what Zhuang Huanyu wanted to say. Zhuang Huanyu was the son of Vice Principal Zhuang, but he stayed in the countryside to take care of his sick mother. After many years of hardship, he finally succeeded and became the pride of the Heavenly Academy. Even now, his feet were still wearing a pair of normal cloth shoes. Chun Changsheng just didn't understand why Zhuang Huanyu's gaze was also so cold, with a hint of hostility. He couldn't understand when he had offended this person. Zhuang Huanyu was the future of the tradition's new faction, so it was natural for him to be hostile to the Tradition Academy. As for the old grudge between him and Tang 36, it was actually the same as Guan Fei Bai's attitude towards Tang 36. It was probably the natural disgust of a poor kid toward a rich kid who didn't cherish his life. So why didn't he like him? "Shall we begin?" Zhuang Huanyu asked. His tone was very normal, just like how he usually asked his classmates during his classes at the Heavenly Academy. "Shall we begin the class?" Chun Changsheng's response was also very normal, nodding his head. Zhuang Huanyu raised his scabbard horizontally, his left hand holding the scabbard, his right hand holding the hilt. He looked at him quietly and said, "Please." Chun Changsheng's right hand held the hilt of a short sword by his waist, his left hand extended horizontally in front of him, and said, "Please." Just like that, the battle began as usual. But the beginning was extremely unusual. With a clang, Zhuang Huanyu drew his sword out of the scabbard, seemingly casually swinging it towards the air in front of him. Although it seemed casual, in reality, this sword was extremely focused. The sword's edge cut through the air, leaving behind a straight line, absolutely parallel to the ground, without any deviation. Not all swords could slash out such a straight line. Zhuang Huanyu's sword cut out a straight line. 100 feet away, there was an arc. It was a slightly round arc of light, extremely bright. This bright arc of light didn't appear in the air, nor did it appear on the sand, but it appeared in Chun Changsheng's eyes. Chun Changsheng's eyes were very bright. His pupils were very black, not like the darkness of the night, but a cleaner kind of black. A faint arc of sword light appeared in his black pupils. It was very clear. This was because the sword in Zhuang Huanyu's hand in the air had instantly cut through the air, ignoring the distance of over 10 yards, and arrived in front of him. This sword light was less than 3 feet away from his eyes. That sword light had arrived too quickly, to the extent that its two ends were somewhat sluggish. The straight line, when the sword was drawn, when it arrived in front of Chun Changsheng, had actually become an arc. This was a perfect arc, No matter how Chen Changsheng responded, it would be very difficult to break through it because arts are the most sturdy. At the same time, it was also very difficult for him to defend against because no matter which part of the sword arc he struck, the remaining parts of the sword arc would follow its high speed and become a circle, enveloping his body within. This battle had a very ordinary beginning, but an extremely unusual beginning. Zhuang Huanyu's first move was Heavenly Academy's most powerful sword move, the Sword of Hithering Light. A barely audible sound of praise came from a room on the second floor. It was a very simple sword move, but could be seen that Zhuang Huanyu's cultivation was not simple. Even the entire grand examination, this sword move of his could be ranked in the top 3. How could Qin Changsheng break through this sword move? Chapter 163. Yellow sand rose from the ground, akin to a sandstorm. Chun Changsheng suddenly disappeared. A cracking sound was heard. A clear sword mark appeared on the stone wall of the Tower of Purging Dust. Qin Changsheng's figure once again appeared. This time, he was already 2 zhang away from his original position. He couldn't clearly see how he had arrived at this place. He glanced at it from the corner of his eyes, only to see that the sword mark on the stone wall was about an inch deep, faintly revealing the white stone. This was His Holiness Green Leaf World, between reality and illusion. The building was exceptionally sturdy. Moreover, the tower originally had a defensive array. Zhuang Huanyu's seemingly casual swing of the sword was actually able to leave such a deep sword mark on the stone wall. One could imagine what kind of damage it would have caused if it had landed on his body. Even if his body's current defensive capabilities were unimaginably strong, it was still impossible for him to directly receive this strike. Fortunately, he hadn't thought of breaking through Zhuang Huanyu's strike, nor had he thought of blocking it. From the very beginning, his only thought was to first avoid this strike. In the instant that Zhuang Huanyu drew his sword, he had already moved. When that stern sword flash lit up in his eyes, his right foot had already stepped into the yellow sand on the ground. Then he suddenly moved. If the yellow sand on the ground could reflect the true night sky, the position he had first stood upon would be the position of the Orion star, and his current position would be the position of the Kong star. He had imitated the yellow sand as a blizzard, borrowing the will of the blizzard. Walking on the position of the constellations, his body technique was strange and unpredictable. It was precisely discerning steps. This is discerning steps? Zhuang Huanyu looked at him and calmly said, not moved by the fact that Qin Changsheng had avoided his sword flash. It was obvious that he was already aware of Qin Changsheng's performance in the previous rounds. Qin Changsheng didn't say anything. His right hand still tightly gripped the hilt of his sword, his gaze slightly lowered, falling upon Zhuang Huanyu's right hand that was gripping the sword. Zhuang Huanyu took a step forward, his long sword extended horizontally, his demeanor extremely calm. Qin Changsheng could clearly see that his right hand that was gripping the sword slightly tightened, his knuckles slightly white, a sign that he was about to exert force. Several sword flashes soundlessly traversed a distance of over a dozen zhang, arriving before him. Qin Changsheng still moved before the sword flashes. His divine sense condensed into a single line. His figure abruptly sped up, seemingly taking 2 steps towards the west, but in an instant he had arrived behind. It was still discerning steps. This time, he was treading the path of the 7 mansions of the east. Shing, shing, shing. Several extremely clear, cutting sounds rang out from the stone wall behind him to his right. Stone chips rustled and fell to the ground. 4 distinct sword marks appeared, extremely sharp. Zhuang Huanyu's expression was calm. He took another step forward, closing the distance between him and Qin Changsheng. Qin Changsheng stared at his right hand that was holding the sword, his expression solemn. Zhuang Huanyu's sword was too fast, too fierce. The battle had just begun, and he had only swung his sword twice, but he already felt an enormous pressure. A faint sigh of admiration came from the second floor. That was praise for Zhuang Huanyu. In the first few rounds of the grand examination, Zhuang Huanyu didn't encounter any strong opponents. His performance was very ordinary, completely lacking the temperament of a leader of the younger generation in the capital's academies, and was actually somewhat overlooked. However, he had once defeated Qi Jian, and after that, he had always been quietly cultivating in the Heavenly Academy, so his ranking on the proclamation of Azure Clouds had always been around the 10th place. That was because his target was Qiushan Jun, and Qiushan Jun was no longer on the proclamation of Azure Clouds. In reality, he believed that he had the strength to enter the top 3 of the proclamation of Azure Clouds. Even if he met Zhixio, he would not be afraid. The pride of Heavenly Academy naturally had the right to be proud. For such a proud young expert, against Chun Changsheng, he had actually displayed the supreme arts of Heavenly Academy right from the start. This showed that he greatly valued Chun Changsheng, and also showed that he didn't want to give Chun Changsheng any chances. Chun Changsheng's movement technique was too fast, too unpredictable. If he had an offensive ability that matched his movement technique, then he might actually be a threat to Zhuang Huanyu. Therefore, Zhuang Huanyu didn't give him any chance to attack, directly relying on his fierce sword intent to suppress him within the range of the stone wall. This was the suppression of an expert who had an absolute advantage in terms of cultivation and power, just like how Luo had previously suppressed that scholar from Scholartree Manor. He once again swung his sword, and several sword flashes pierced through the air. Shrill sounds of piercing through the air continuously resounded. Sand gradually rose within the tower. Sword flashes continuously flashed through the air, akin to lightning. Sword marks constantly appeared on the stone wall, clear and deep, as if a craftsman was currently carving calligraphy on it. Many footprints appeared on the yellow sand on the ground, some on the west, some on the east, without any pattern. A light sound was heard. Chun Changsheng appeared at a place near the stone wall. A very shallow wound had appeared on his right shoulder. Dozens of sword flashes arrived one after another. He had narrowly avoided most of them, but in the end, in the process of moving from Willow Well to Lu Su, his true essence circulation had become sluggish, slowing him down for a moment, allowing the sword flashes to catch up. Zhuang Huanyu held his sword and pointed it towards the ground, appearing exceptionally confident. Compared to him, Chun Changsheng's clothes were covered in sand. No matter how shallow the wound was, it was still a wound. Therefore, he was in a rather sorry state. But his expression remained calm. Looking at Zhuang Huanyu's right hand that was holding the sword, he was extremely focused. The Sword of Hithering Light was a supreme technique of Heavenly Academy. It consumed a lot of true essence. A movement technique at the level of discerning steps would naturally consume a lot of true essence as well. The reason why Zhuang Huanyu was so confident, directly using his sword technique to suppress Qin Changsheng, was because he was diligent in his cultivation, had high talent, his fated star was extremely far away, his true essence quantity could be said to be at the peak amongst his peers. Even if he were to continue like this, he would still be able to directly exhaust Chun Changsheng, and Qin Changsheng had no way of breaking out of this situation. "Is this all you've got?" He looked at Chun Changsheng and asked. His expression was very serious. Without any hint of ridicule, disappointment could be seen between his slightly tired brows. In order to prepare for the grand examination, ever since the Ivy League gathering, he had been cultivating day and night, all for the sake of today's match. Yet, although Chun Changsheng's performance could already be considered to be very good, it still left him very dissatisfied. Chun Changsheng's breathing was a little hurried, continuously using discerning steps and pushing his speed to the limit. The little true essence within his body had been completely exhausted. His divine sense had also become extremely tired due to being used to calculate star positions and footwork techniques. The most troublesome thing was Zhuang Huanyu's sword was too swift and fierce. He could barely dodge, but was unable to hit his opponent. In the end, he would still lose. He didn't want to lose. He needed to attack. At the same time that Zhuang Huanyu asked that question, his right foot once again stepped towards the sand in front of him. But this time he didn't use discerning steps. Instead, he transferred all of his strength to the soles of his feet. The terrifying strength that he had mysteriously obtained from that night's encounter with the Black Dragon instantly caused the ground to crack, his body leaving behind an afterimage as it whizzed forward. With a swish, Zhuang Huanyu's sword was noiseless, but the sound of the sword's flash tearing through the air was extremely clear. Chen Changsheng's current speed was unimaginably fast. Just as he was about to collide with that flash of sword, he suddenly disappeared. He had actually hidden the movement technique of the Yesher step within his charge. Within the sand, his figure flickered. In an instant, Chen Changsheng had arrived before Zhuang Huanyu. This was the first time he had been so close to Zhuang Huanyu, close to the point where he could finally attack. His left hand gripped the scabbard. His right hand gripped the hilt, preparing to draw his sword. At this moment, Zhuang Huanyu's sword-like eyebrows slightly twitched, his eyes revealing an expression of pity. A fist shot out. His right hand gripped the sword, his left hand hanging by his side. Unexpectedly, he had been slowly accumulating true essence. What seemed like a casual punch, in reality, had been accumulating power for a long time. A muffled sound rang out, akin to the sound of a bell. A powerful force shot into the air along with his fist, and a shockwave spread in all directions. Chen Changsheng was directly sent flying, somersaulting many times in the air, akin to a stone, falling towards the ground in the distance. With a paw, he heavily landed on the ground, but he didn't fall because his bare feet first landed on the sand. His knees were in a half-crouch. He actually stood steadily. The short sword was placed horizontally before his eyes. It was probably this short sword that had blocked the punch that Zhuang Huanyu had been patiently waiting for. The hands that gripped the short sword were slightly trembling. No matter how great his strength was, against an explosive blow that contained such a large amount of true essence, he was still at a disadvantage. Is this the extent of it? Zhuang Huanyu walked towards him, repeating those words, then said, "This really makes me a little disappointed." Observing Chen Changsheng's level was one of the most important reasons why he had participated in the grand examination. When he had seen Luo and Chen Changsheng together outside of Li Palace, in the hall of Zhaowen, by the banks of the river Chu, by the woodlands outside of the Tower of Purging Dust, he had been angry, then calm. The more angry he was, the calmer he became. Chen Changsheng stood up, looked at him, and said, "Defeat me first." Finishing those words, his figure once again disappeared. Within the Tower of Purging Dust, sand flew up, akin to a blizzard. He squeezed out the last of his true essence, using his divine sense to calculate his position at an unimaginable speed. Within the blizzard of sand, his figure would appear and disappear, sometimes in the east, sometimes in the west. In an instant, countless footprints appeared on the ground, densely packed, akin to the stars in the night sky. He walked according to the positions of the constellations. His footwork was extremely strange and hard to grasp, as if in the next moment he would appear in front of Zhuang Huanyu and deliver a fatal blow. No matter how fast or fierce the sword of Hithering Light was, it couldn't catch up to Chen Changsheng in his current state. He didn't look at Zhuang Huanyu's sword, nor did he pay attention to his surroundings. He only minded his own business, using discerning steps. Discerning steps tread on the stars, borrowing the blizzard to conceal itself. There would come a time when it would arrive in front of Zhuang Huanyu. From the looks of it, this seemed to be a very ingenious response. Every time the curved sword flash was about to strike his body, it would always brush past his shoulder. Zhuang Huanyu's expression was slightly stern, but he wasn't nervous. He couldn't clearly see Chen Changsheng's position. He couldn't calculate where Chen Changsheng would appear in the next moment. Thus, he closed his eyes. He wasn't using his divine sense to sense Chen Changsheng's position, because even if he could, his sword wouldn't be able to descend in time. The sword of Hithering Light fell from his hand, touching the yellow sand on the ground, causing it to slightly tremble. He spread out his hands, his black hair wildly fluttering, true essence bursting forth. The sword of Hithering Lights, trembling instantly, became extremely violent. Chi 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 chi. Hundreds of sword shadows left the sword's body, instantly filling up the entire space within the tower. In the next moment, several sword shadows appeared slightly sluggish in the northwest direction of the tower. Chen Changsheng was slashed out by those sword shadows. His body heavily collided against the stone wall, falling to the ground along the stone wall, stirring up several plumes of dust. 3 wounds appeared on his body, blood slowly seeping out. "Now I've struck you down." Zhuang Huanyu opened his eyes, calmly saying while looking at him, "With eyes closed, I won't see. 100 swords, see you tomorrow." Chen Changsheng doesn't play with swords. Chapter 164. The sword of Hithering Light was a sword art, but also a sword. It was the sword of Heavenly Academy, or more accurately, it had always been the sword of Principal Zhuang. This sword wasn't ranked on the tier of legendary weapons, but its power wasn't far off from the weapons at the bottom of the tier. If a normal person was hit 3 times by the sword of Hithering Light, no matter how perfect their purification was, they would still be beheaded or at least heavily injured and unable to stand up. Chen Changsheng, however, used his hands to support himself against the stone wall and stood up. But he still received heavy injuries. Blood seeped out from the 3 sword marks on his chest, looking rather terrifying. "Is this all you've got?" Zhuang Huanyu looked at him expressionlessly, paused for a moment, then said with a heavier tone, "How can you be qualified to be Her Highness teacher with this level of skill?" The Highness he was referring to was obviously not the Princess of Pinghua, nor Prince Chenlu, but Princess Luo Luo. "If you truly mastered the discerning step, perhaps you can make me wary, but your discerning step is still fake, or perhaps just an imitation. It looks right, but isn't. How can it be used in battle? It's just an illusion. As long as you close your eyes, your movement won't be able to deceive this world." Zhuang Huanyu looked at him and continued, "It's just like how you taught Her Highness those true essence circulation methods. They seem exquisite, but in reality, they're all evil paths that won't allow her to reach the next level. They're just playing petty tricks. If you really want Her Highness to have a better future, then you should let her continue to stay in the Heavenly Academy and solve that problem by studying the orthodox cultivation methods of the profound sections." Yes, this was the origin of his resentment towards Chen Changsheng. This was why he wasn't satisfied with Chen Changsheng. He hoped that Chen Changsheng could become stronger, to prove to himself and the world that he was qualified to be Her Highness teacher, and not like now, easily defeated by him. So he was just a deceiver. That's our tradition academy's problem. Thank you for your suggestion, but I may not accept it. Chen Changsheng lifted his right arm and used his sleeve to wipe off the blood on his chin, then looked at Zhuang Huanyu and said. Zhuang Huanyu's eyebrows twitched, looked at him unhappily and shouted, "Are you still going to be stubborn? Reality has already proven that no matter how perfect your purification is, no matter how strong your defense is, you are still no match for the truly strong, because your true essence is too thin and your stage is too low." Chen Changsheng was silent. He lowered his head and looked at the sword hilt that he was tightly holding. Zhuang Huanyu saw that he did not respond, and for some reason became even angrier. In a cold voice, he said, "Cultivation is a great learning, but in the end, one still has to rely on true essence to strike. Since ancient times, the first step in cultivation is purification, followed by meditation and ethereal opening. Every stage has its own logic. Purification is the prerequisite for meditation, but it is not a method of battle. Your true essence is so thin, and you are only at the initial stage of meditation, yet you want to rely on the power of purification to defeat your opponent. How arrogant and ignorant. Am I wrong to say that you have embarked on the path of evil? It's fine if you leave on your own, but do you want to bring His Highness to this path of no return?" The Tower of Purging Dust was silent. Only the voice of this young expert from the Heavenly Academy reverberated coldly and valiantly, landing on the yellow sand-covered floor. His cultivation level is too low. What can he do? As expected, Chen Changsheng can only reach this point. In the dark room on the 2nd floor, the voice of the headmaster of the Star Seeker Academy resounded. It was a little emotional, a little regretful, and also a little relieved. This room was very large. Everyone sat in their respective seats, remaining silent. Listening to Zhuang Huanyu's voice that came from outside the window, they all came to the same conclusion regarding this match. In the previous round, Chen Changsheng was able to defeat the young expert from Shuang City, who was ranked in the top 20 on the proclamation of Azure Clouds. This was because he had used his speed to its maximum and had suddenly displayed discerning steps, causing the expert from Shuang City to be somewhat unprepared. In the end, he lost due to the level of strength that he could fully display in close combat. But in this round, his opponent was Zhuang Huanyu. Zhuang Huanyu was the most outstanding student from the Heavenly Academy. He cultivated the orthodox cultivation method of the Xin sect. Every step of his cultivation was extremely solid and stable, never advancing prematurely. In addition, he had the guidance of the Academy's teachers, making him extremely experienced. When he attacked, he relied on his absolute superiority in true essence and moves to directly crush Chun Changsheng, not giving his opponent any chance to get close to him. This naturally prevented any accidents from occurring. Principal Mao Qiuyu's disciple is indeed extraordinary. His Eminence, the Bishop of Temple Seminary, sighed. The personages in the room had been observing the match for a long time. Having seen Zhishio and Go Hanshi fight, they knew that Zhuang Huanyu wasn't the one with the highest level of cultivation, but he was the one with the steadiest cultivation. In other words, while it would be difficult for him to explode and defeat an expert like Go Hanshi, as long as it was an opponent with a lower level of cultivation, it would be impossible for them to defeat him. Especially after witnessing this match, people could faintly feel that Zhuang Huanyu's level was even higher than what was rumored to be. Even if he were to go against Her Highness or Zhishio, he would still have the strength to contend with them. Victory or defeat was difficult to determine. How could his opponent for this round, Chun Changsheng, be his match? That's right, the personages observing the match, including the Li Palace clergy in the other rooms, had already declared Chun Changsheng's defeat. After a few matches, people had already confirmed that this student of Orthodox Academy, who couldn't cultivate a few months ago, had indeed completed his purification, but he was only at the initial stage of meditation. Whether it was true essence quantity, purity, or other aspects, there was still a large gap between him and the true experts that participated in the grand examination. For Chun Changsheng to be able to reach this stage and enter the top 8 of the grand examination, apart from luck, he had completely relied on his unimaginable speed and strength. But now, his luck had lost its meaning because all of his opponents were true experts. No matter how unfathomable speed or strength was, it was meaningless because those experts could directly crush him in terms of cultivation level and quantity of true essence. As long as he didn't act like the youth expert from Shuang City in the previous round and make a huge mistake in tactics, he had no chance of victory. The difference in cultivation level wasn't something that could be made up for with hard work or courage. Sure enough, quantity of true essence is still the most important. Chun Changsheng looked at the dagger that was tightly gripped in his hand and said to himself. Zhuang Huanyu looked at him and faintly frowned, not knowing what he meant by those words. Chun Changsheng's face didn't show any expression, seeming a little wooden. No one could see that he was currently struggling internally, hesitating whether or not to take the risk. A cultivator's true essence originates from the stars in the night sky. While absorbing starlight for purification, the star brilliance that contained a strange energy would also enter the cultivator's body, waiting for the moment of meditation to be triggered or ignited by the cultivator's divine sense, becoming true essence that the cultivator could use as they wished. Chun Changsheng's true essence quantity was indeed very small and impure. His meridians were all broken. How could he allow his true essence to circulate freely? But his body still contained a large amount of star brilliance. In other words, if he wanted to, he could allow himself to have even more true essence, but that would be an extremely large risk. In the underground space beneath the abandoned well at Noon North Bridge, before that black dragon, he didn't know why, but he had actually skipped over the bottleneck of purification and directly succeeded in meditation. His current body was much stronger than it was at that time, but it was still very difficult for him to make the decision to attempt meditation again, because if he failed, there was a high chance that he would die. The medical record on the scripture of meditation, as well as his own experiences, both proved this point. To brave the shadow of death for the first time, all you needed was courage, but the second time, you needed even more courage. Thankfully, on the night of the Ivy League gathering, on the day of forced meditation, in the underground space before that black dragon, he had already experienced 2 life and death situations. Towards death, which he had pondered for many years, he had undergone 2 true reflections. He had thought through many things. Facing death, he still wouldn't surrender, but he wasn't as fearful as before. Just like now, facing a strong foe like Zhuang Huanyu, he wouldn't surrender, nor would he fear. He raised his head, looked at Zhuang Huanyu, and said, "If that's the case, then I'll try." Try what? Apart from him, no one in the tower knew. They couldn't even guess. Chun Chang closed his eyes, took a deep breath, then let it all out. It was as if bubbles were bubbling up from the bottom of a spring. In between breaths, his lungs seemed to be devoid of air. It was suddenly empty, an emptiness that didn't even have air. His sea of consciousness awoke. The surface of the sea lightly rippled. An extremely condensed divine sense emerged from within his sea of consciousness, drifting upwards, heading somewhere in the azure sky, as if it was about to leave this world. In another instant, that divine sense returned from the azure sky to the ground, shrinking back, entering his body from the outside, arriving within that small world. His divine sense transformed into a gust of wind, freely traversing within that world. The gust of wind was him. He was the gust of wind. He saw the 9 mountain ranges, saw the boundless wilderness, saw the lake that was suspended in mid-air. Finally, he saw that snowy plain. The snowy plain had been sliced into dozens of pieces by extremely deep cracks. Compared to the time he had used meditation and introspection a few days ago, this snowy plain was much thicker. Even at this moment, there were still snowflakes continuously falling. These past few days, he had never stopped drawing starlight into his body. Those snowflakes were all extremely pure star brilliance. As long as they were touched by divine sense and ignited, they would become clear water that nourished this world. That clear water was true essence. Using Zhuang Huanyu's words, using many people's words, using the scripture of the way, for cultivators, the most important thing was true essence. Chun Chang hesitated for a very short moment. He really wasn't afraid of death, but he didn't want to experience that kind of pain again, because that kind of pain could very well cause him to faint on the spot. Once that happened, he would naturally lose this match. But it was something that had to be done. Hesitation was hesitation, but that gust of wind didn't stop. It floated down toward a snowy plain in the southeast corner. Like a wildfire, it landed amongst the mountains that were piled with dried leaves. With a boom, that snowy plain began to fiercely burn. The room on the second floor was very quiet. The important personages sat in their respective seats in silence, waiting for Chun Chang to admit defeat, waiting for this match to end, waiting for this year's grand examination to finally come to an end. The Orthodoxy's conservative factions plan, or perhaps it should be said, attempt, had suffered the heaviest blow. Yet, at this moment, an aura suddenly emerged from within the tower of purging dust. That aura was a little berserk. It was extremely blazing, as if someone had lit a bonfire downstairs, and the intensity of the fire was extremely great. Moyu's expression became slightly stern. She stood up, her palace dress leaving behind an afterimage in the dusky room. She instantly arrived before the window. Her gaze passed through the paper flowers on the window. Looking downstairs, her face was expressionless, but her eyes revealed a strange splendor. The great figures present were all experts with profound realms. How could they not sense what that aura represented? No one paid any attention to the realm of strength that Moyu had displayed in that instant. They all came to the window and looked downstairs. As their gazes fell, their expressions changed abruptly. For a moment, they were speechless. In front of the stone wall downstairs, Chun Chang stood within the yellow sand, his eyes closed. Beside his bare feet was the sand that had been drenched by the blood that had flowed from his body. That berserk, blazing aura originated from his body. Everyone could clearly feel that his cultivation level was rising. The true essence within his body was increasing. His aura was becoming stronger. Within the perception of divine sense, he was becoming brighter and brighter, akin to a real bonfire. How is this possible? How is this possible? Everyone stood by the window, witnessing this scene. The expressions on their faces became extremely strange, abnormally shocked. Chun Chong Sheng had actually begun meditative introspection. He was converting star brilliance into true essence. The problem was apart from the very beginning, when moving from the purification stage to the meditation stage. A cultivator would burn all of their accumulated star brilliance into true essence, causing such a strong aura to leak outwards. Afterwards, cultivators using star brilliance to nourish their true essence was a simple matter. How could there be such a large disturbance? Was this Chun Chong Sheng's first time undergoing meditative introspection? Impossible. Through the previous few rounds of battle, everyone was very clear that he had already completed his cultivation from purification to meditation. Otherwise, his body wouldn't have true essence circulating within it. Then what was with this scene? Could it be that there was someone in this world that could undergo the first stage of meditation twice? The Tower of Purging Dust was deathly silent. Everyone was shocked, speechless. Whether it was the knowledgeable personages by the window or the Li Palace clergy. Zhuang Huanyu was even more shocked, to the point of being speechless. The temperature within the tower instantly rose. Chun Chong Sheng closed his eyes. The sand by his feet began to float upwards. The sand that had been congealed into a ball by the blood, after being roasted by an invisible high temperature, began to dry up and scatter. The blood had all turned into green smoke. Within the fluttering sand, Chun Chong Sheng's face grew redder and redder. His body could be felt becoming hotter and hotter. Seeing this scene, an archbishop of the Holy Church slightly frowned and calmed down. He didn't know how Chun Chong Sheng was able to undergo a second stage of meditation, but he could see that this youth had no way of controlling the burning of star brilliance within his body. If this continues, even if he doesn't burn to death, his mind will suffer from the burn, said Prince Chenlu worriedly. As long as purification was successful, a cultivator's body would be able to withstand the high temperature and strength brought about by the conversion of star brilliance into true essence during initial meditation. But Chun Chong Sheng's current meditation was clearly a little strange. The amount of star brilliance burning within his body seemed to be a little too much. His body's temperature couldn't help but continuously rise. The Tower of Purging Dust became hotter and hotter. The sound of cicadas could suddenly be heard from outside, as if summer had arrived early. Deep within the palace, there was a palace. In a corner of the palace, there was a gray clay basin. Within the basin was a plant with several green stems, but only a single green leaf. The edge of the green leaf was slightly withered and slightly curled. My memory has indeed deteriorated when I get old. I actually forgot to water it again. His Holiness walked to the side of the basin, sighing as he looked at the green leaf. He then picked up a wooden ladle and extended it towards the pond beside the basin. I just remembered that today is Monday. I'll have to trouble everyone to vote for me. Thanks. I'll try to finish the next chapter before 12:30. Chapter 165. The clear water slowly flowed out from the ladle and fell into the gray pottery basin. The green leaves were hit by the water and kept bouncing. After watering the water, the Pope threw the wooden ladle back into the pond and walked out of the hall with his hands behind his back, as if he had done something very normal. The soil in the pot became moist, and the previously withered green leaves returned to their original state. The edges were no longer curled, and the veins of the leaves became clearer. A dew-like water droplet gently rolled on the surface of the water. Many days ago, His Holiness the Pope and His Eminence the Bishop had a conversation here. Back then, His Eminence the Bishop had said that maturing required the nourishment of rain, and sometimes, even more so, pressure. Right now, that green leaf had already endured too much pressure, or perhaps it was precisely the time when it needed the nourishment of rain. The Tower of Purging Dust was within the green leaf world. Chun Chong Sheng's body was burning hot, and his face was red. The blood on his clothes had already evaporated. His aura was getting stronger and stronger. At the same time, the restlessness in the building was getting stronger and stronger. Emoyu stood by the window, looking at the proud youth who was enduring the pain. Her expression was still indifferent, but her hands were already clasped together in her sleeves. "Can you make him stop?" Prince Chen Lu glanced at her imperceptibly and asked. Mou remained silent. Chun Chang Sheng was currently at a crucial moment in his initial meditation. Not to mention that he had his eyes closed and was unaware of what was happening around him. Even if he could communicate with the outside world, he still wouldn't be able to stop the star brilliance within his body from burning. If he could do that, why would he be in such a dangerous situation? The only thing that could interrupt this process and save him from the brink of death was an external force, and it had to be a very powerful one, even at the legendary level. In the capital, only two people had this kind of power, the Pope and the Divine Empress. The problem was that Chun Chang Sheng and the Orthodox Academy were the symbols pushed out by the Orthodoxy elders loyal to the Chun imperial family and the conservative factions to challenge the current order. How could the Divine Queen and the Pope act? The temperature inside the tower of purging dust became higher and higher. The sound of cicadas outside the tower became louder and louder. This was the reaction of the green leaf world. In the end, Chun Chang Sheng had still underestimated the degree of danger of burning star brilliance. This was because the condition of his body was different from the others. Ever since the heavenly tones had descended upon the world, this continent had never experienced a situation like his. Even the 3,000 scriptures of the Way didn't have any similar records. He could really die from this, or be burned into an idiot. Who can change all this? Who could extinguish the invisible fire in his body and lower the temperature of the green leaf world? At this moment, a drop of rain suddenly fell from the blue sky. Then came 1,000 drops of rain, 10,000 drops of rain, a torrential downpour. Hua 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 hua. A majestic downpour descended from the sky, falling upon the black eaves of the tower, falling upon a yellow sand, also falling upon Chun Chang Sheng's body. There was no sound except for the rain. Everyone looked at the sky and the pillar of rain. They were shocked, speechless, and filled with awe. Mou's eyes were filled with a hint of fear and confusion. There were no clouds, but it rained. This rain naturally came from outside the world. A bishop of the Holy Church looked at the rain falling from the sky, his expression constantly changing. As one of the Orthodoxy's 6 prefects, he naturally knew where this rain was coming from. But as a trusted aide of the Pope, he could not understand why there would be this rain. Why did the saint help that youth from the Tradition Academy? The rain could wash away the dust of the world, but it could also take away the warmth. The rainwater fell upon Chun Chang Sheng's body, coming into contact with his burning skin, instantly evaporating into water vapor. At the same time, his body temperature was also rapidly decreasing. The temperature within the tower was also rapidly decreasing. Previously, it seemed to have been midsummer, the heat unbearable, but after this rain, it had become late autumn, the chill gradually rising. Zhuang Huanyu suddenly felt a little cold. At that moment, he heard a cough coming from the second floor. He didn't know who it was that coughed, but he knew that person was reminding him that he had to make the first move before this autumn rain ended. Although he wasn't clear on what was happening to Chun Chang Sheng's body, he couldn't give any chance for an accident to occur. But he didn't move. This was because this autumn rain was too majestic, creating gullies upon the yellow sand, causing him to feel a sense of awe and fear, not daring to cross it. But that didn't matter. Because he was the pride of Heavenly Academy, he was very proud. He had originally wanted to prove to the entire continent and Her Highness that Chun Chang Sheng was inferior to him. Therefore, defeating Chun Chang Sheng at his strongest was the best thing that could happen. One autumn rain, one cold. The interior of the building gradually became cold and cheerless. The downpour gradually thinned, becoming a pitter-patter. Chun Chang Sheng opened his eyes. His eyes were very bright, akin to raindrops, allowing him to clearly see the hidden scenes of this world. The yellow sand that was floating around his body had already fallen. The true essence that had leaked out had all been absorbed back into his body. He, who had once again entered initial meditation, successfully surpassing levels, was currently at his peak. He raised the short sword in his hand. A sword manifestation, akin to autumn rain, enveloped the entire tower, instantly arriving before Zhuang Huanyu. The first form of Zhongshan's sword of wind and rain, rising pale yellow. Zhuang Huanyu's face instantly paled. He didn't think that in such a short period of time, akin to a single rainstorm, Chen Changsheng had closed his eyes and opened them, had become so strong. The sword intent that was like the autumn rain was condensed to the extreme, and the true essence contained within it was also extremely powerful. Under his slightly shocked state, he didn't have the time to react, putting him at an absolute disadvantage. That condensed yet unreleased sword manifestation was akin to an autumn rain that had yet to fall, only a foot away from the center of his eyebrows. Drip, drip, drip. The rain on the black eaves slowly fell, hitting the ground. The yellow sand had already been washed away by the rain, revealing the flagstone beneath. The rainwater struck against the flagstone. The monotonous sound caused the atmosphere to become abnormally tense. Sheng didn't continue to attack. This strike was his first strike after breaking through to the next stage. His mental energy and sword momentum were at their peak. For Zhuang Huanyu to momentarily lose focus, it was highly possible that he would be defeated by this strike. But he didn't. He waited for Zhuang Huanyu to regain his senses. This was because when he had closed his eyes in meditation, Zhuang Huanyu had given him time. Whether it was due to the gully that had been created by the autumn rain within the yellow sand, causing Zhuang Huanyu to not dare to advance, or due to pride, he had given Chen Changsheng a chance. Therefore, Chen Changsheng was now returning this chance to him. The Tower of Purging Dust was silent. A battle between youths is indeed different. Someone on the second floor side. If it was an adult, in an important competition like the Grand Examination, they definitely wouldn't give their opponent any chances. Only youths would do this. Perhaps it was because they hadn't experienced much, their bodies weren't stained with too much dust, or perhaps it was because this autumn rain had washed away the dust on their bodies. In short, compared to adults, they still believed in things like fairness. Perhaps this was naive and childish, but it also represented a certain vitality and confidence. Now you can't beat me. Chen Changsheng looked at Zhuang Huanyu and said, "Admit defeat." That's all for today. Chapter 166. Chen Changsheng's clothes were in tatters, and his chest was injured. He looked as miserable as he could be. If Tang 36 saw this, he would definitely mock him for being beaten like a dog. Yet under these circumstances, he actually wanted Zhuang Huanyu to admit defeat. Looking at his expression, it didn't seem like he was joking. His attitude was very serious, and his tone was very sincere, causing Zhuang Huanyu to be very angry, feeling that this was a great insult and contempt. Chen Changsheng had no intention of mocking him. He was only making a calm judgment. No matter if it was because of the autumn rain or the increase in his body's strength. Since star brilliance didn't burn him to death, it meant that the snow plane could provide him with an endless supply of true essence. In reality, his true essence was at an unprecedented level. The biggest difference between him and Zhuang Huanyu was no longer there. Why wouldn't he be confident? Why is he so confident? Asked the principal of Star Caesar Academy with a frown. Even if Chen Changsheng had miraculously undergone a second initial meditation, all the important figures in the capital knew that it hadn't even been a year since he confirmed his fated star and started absorbing starlight for purification. While Zhuang Huanyu had already cultivated for over 10 years, why would he think that his true essence level had already caught up to his opponent? Chen Changsheng used reality to prove to everyone that his confidence was reasonable, although he couldn't explain where the reason was. Zhuang Huanyu stared at him. The sword of hithering light that was stabbed into the stone floor slightly trembled. Hundreds of sword shadows once again formed, attacking him from all directions. It was as if the tower was once again experiencing a storm. Chen Changsheng's right hand held onto the short sword, but its position was slightly shifted upwards. The space between his thumb and forefinger was shifted to the edge of the scabbard. It was as if he was using his palm to simultaneously hold onto the sword hilt and scabbard. Naturally, he couldn't draw the sword. He didn't draw the sword, didn't dodge, and didn't use his body to resist. Instead, he struck out with the scabbard and sword. The tower resounded with the sound of a tiger, naturally creating wind. Several strong sword winds collided with the sword shadows that were attacking from all directions, creating a few muffled sounds. Then the sword shadows all shattered and dispersed. Using true essence to fight true essence. They were equal. Using a sword to break the sword shadows was naturally easy. The expressions of the important figures on the second floor slightly changed. They finally confirmed that Chun Changsheng's cultivation level was completely different from before. Whether it was the purity or quantity of true essence, he was at least no weaker than Zhuang Huanyu. Moyu's clenched hands had already loosened. She caressed the window frame, her face still expressionless, but her mood was not as relaxed as it appeared. She didn't want others to see that she didn't want anything to happen to Chun Changsheng, nor did she need to worry that Chun Changsheng wouldn't be able to defeat Zhuang Huanyu. But Chun Changsheng's performance, as well as his unreasonable true essence explosion, made her think of that night many days ago, that night when she and the Divine Empress were gazing at the stars on the dew platform. That night, the Divine Empress sensed that someone was fixing his fated star in the capital. That star was extremely far away, and that person's spiritual sense was extremely serene and powerful. That person was Chun Changsheng. The big shots were deep in thought by the window on the second floor, but the battle below had already become intense. Chun Changsheng, sword and scabbard, used his true essence to forcefully break apart the storm-like sword silhouettes. His figure became faint, and in the next moment, he arrived before Zhuang Huanyu. A distance of over 10 meters was covered in the blink of an eye. He didn't use the sword force of Zhongshan's sword of wind and rain. Instead, he used discerning steps. Zhuang Huanyu had by now completely calmed down. Chun Changsheng easily breaking apart his sword silhouettes made him feel a little surprised, but couldn't cause him to become distracted again. His face didn't contain any fear. He extended his right hand. The sword of hithering lights, trembling, intensified. With a clang, it flew up from the ground and returned to his palm. Clink, 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 clink. Over 10 continuous sword sounds rang out. The sword of hithering light seemed to come alive in his hand. Its sharp edge pierced through the air, thrusting towards Chun Changsheng's body. The ground that had been washed by the autumn rain had remnants of moist yellow sand. Those yellow sand were brought up by Zhuang Huanyu's sword, forming over 10 extremely fine lines of sand. Those lines of sand were sword arts, the visible movement of the sword. Chun Changsheng could use his true essence to break apart those sword silhouettes. But to block those lightning-fast sword maneuvers, an even more exquisite sword maneuver was required. The expressions of the spectators upstairs became extremely focused. They had all seen or heard of the story of Chun Changsheng's exchange with Go Hanshi at the Ivy League gathering. They knew that this unremarkable youth from the Orthodoxy was the same as Go Hanshi, who was well versed in the scripture of the way and knew the sword arts of countless sects and sects. They couldn't help but be curious as to how he would deal with it. Over 10 thin lines of sand attacked Chun Changsheng's body from various angles. Behind the lines of sand was the cold edge of the sword. Chun Changsheng still didn't draw his sword. His hand gripped the edge of the scabbard and the hilt. He couldn't draw his sword even if he wanted to. He gripped the short sword and struck down just like that. The strike was exceptionally clean and efficient, concise and powerful. It didn't seem like a sword art at all, and didn't seem to have any subtlety to it. It was akin to a woman washing clothes by a river, using a wooden mallet to incessantly strike against a rock. It seemed like a normal strike, but when he raised the short sword and struck down, at least 3 important figures by the window upstairs cried out in surprise. Staff of mountain toppling. Yes, what Chun Changsheng used wasn't a sword art, but a staff art. He had read the scrolls of the way since he was a child, and he read extensively. After entering the Tradition Academy, he also read day and night, comparing the Xiaoxing books in the library. The scrolls of the way he read in the first 14 years were all converted into the knowledge needed for Xiaoxing. In terms of understanding of Xiaoxing methods of the sects and schools in the world, besides Go Hanshi, no one was better than him. He was also very diligent in Xiaoxing. In just half a year, he mastered a lot of sword arts and other Xiaoxing methods. At the Ivy Festival, He guided Luo Luo and Tang 36 to defeat Guan Fei Bai and Qi Jian. He relied on this ability, but many people forgot that his mastery of those sword arts and xiuxing methods was only on paper. He knew how to use the 3 movements of Wen Shui, the order and angle of the 7 swords of Lian Shan. But this didn't mean that he could use the 3 movements of Wen Shui and use the 7 swords of Lian Shan casually. Not to mention that he hadn't completed his purification at that time, so he couldn't xiuxing. Even if he wanted to practice the sword, it wouldn't be possible. No matter how diligent he was, no matter how talented he was, he couldn't master so many methods in just a few months. If he wanted to achieve something in the way of the sword, he would need at least 10 years of hard work. Whether it was Xiu Shanjun or Guan Fei Bai who proved at the Ivy Festival that he could use at least 100 sword arts, they were all the same. Other people might have forgotten this, but Chun Chang Sheng himself wouldn't. He knew very well that he couldn't win against Zhuang Huanyu or any of the 4 disciples of Li Shan's sword sect in terms of sword arts. Even if he could think of a method to counter his opponent's sword arts, he couldn't use it in such a tense and intense battle. Xiaxing at different stages needed different levels of battle methods. What he needed now was a relatively simpler and more effective battle method. He couldn't think of a sword art that could counter Heavenly Academy's Sword of Wei, and one that he could currently master. Therefore, his right hand that was holding the sword moved down, and at the same time, he held the sheath along the hilt of the sword. This way of holding the sword showed that he didn't think of drawing the sword. Holding it like this, the short sword became a short stick. He used the stick technique, the staff of mountain toppling. 3 exclamations almost simultaneously sounded on the second floor. The ones who exclaimed were the 2 archbishops of the Holy Church and the bishop of Temple Seminary, because they recognized this type of stick technique because they hadn't seen this type of stick technique for many years. The staff of toppling mountain was a stick technique of Orthodox Academy. According to legend, when it was first created, it was a stick used by the Academy supervisor to punish students who violated the rules. Orthodox Academy had already declined for over 10 years, so this type of stick technique naturally hadn't appeared on the continent for over 10 years. The 2 archbishops of the Holy Church were important figures of the Orthodoxy's new faction and naturally opposed to Orthodox Academy that represented the old faction. However, even for them, after over 10 years, to suddenly see the famous staff of toppling mountain once again within the Orthodoxy, they still couldn't help but exclaim in surprise, and their emotions instantly became extremely complicated. Xue Xingchuan and Su Shiji were also people who had seen the glory of Orthodox Academy in the past, and were only slightly later than the 3 archbishops. They also recognized the stick technique used by Chun Chang Sheng, and their expressions slightly changed. The staff of toppling mountain was the stick technique of Orthodox Academy. It walked the path of violence and straightforwardness. It was simple and clear, and its goal was to beat the students down, to beat them in pain. This type of stick technique didn't seem to have any logic to it, but in reality, it concealed many principles. Just like the rules of Orthodox Academy, you couldn't avoid it, you could only endure it. Zhuang Huanyu's expression was incomparably grave, but the sword in his hand didn't slow down in the slightest. Chun Chang Sheng's short sword's momentum was too direct, so direct that it didn't seem to be any sort of technique. It seemed that the sword in his hand had enough room to stab into Chun Chang Sheng's body first, but the short sword in Chun Chang Sheng's hand gave him a feeling that if he were to do so, then in the next moment, no matter how heavily injured Chun Chang Sheng was, his sword would still fall from its scabbard and strike onto his body. Attacking first seemed to be meaningless. Dodge? It seemed like he couldn't dodge, so he could only block it head-on. Zhuang Huanyu's true essence flowed out in an endless stream. The tip of his sword pierced through the air, meeting Chun Chang Sheng's sword. The staff of toppling mountain against the sword of hithering light was akin to Orthodox Academy against Heavenly Academy. If the newly reborn Orthodox Academy wanted to regain its position within the Orthodoxy, it seemed that it had to pass through this hurdle. The 2 swords met in the air, then separated, then met again. No matter how unreasonable Chun Chang Sheng's sword descended, it would always be blocked by Zhuang Huanyu's sword. No matter how exquisite Zhuang Huanyu's sword moves were, he had no way of breaking through Chen Changsheng's sword. In an extremely short period of time, the two swords met over a dozen times. A deafening sound of collision resounded within the tower. Over a dozen white balls of air continuously formed around the two of them before exploding in an instant. Those balls of air were the vibrations emitted when the two swords met. Clap, 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 clap. The two figures suddenly separated. Zhuang Huanyu gave a muffled groan, his face slightly pale, his right hand, which was holding onto his sword, slightly trembled. He wasn't able to completely seal off Chen Changsheng's sword. At the last moment, Chen Changsheng's sword descended from its scabbard, striking onto his wrist. If it wasn't for Zhuang Huanyu's sword manifestation pointing straight at him, in a slanted thrust, allowing the tip of Chen Changsheng's scabbard to graze him, perhaps his wrist would have already been shattered. In a direct confrontation, using sword against sword, in the end, he was actually at a disadvantage. Zhuang Huanyu couldn't accept this reality. His face became rather pale. In the next moment, he threw the scabbard onto the ground and once again advanced. Chapter 167. A sword without a scabbard. Its edge was revealed. Zhuang Huanyu's sword broke through the wind, no longer holding anything back. Imbued with vigorous true essence, it pierced towards Chen Changsheng's body. The tip of the sword emitted a green light and a chi-chi sound. The sand on the ground once again rose up, dancing in the air. Chen Changsheng used discerning steps. His figure suddenly blurred, leaving behind a series of afterimages as he surrounded Zhuang Huanyu, the short sword in his hand like a staff, continuously striking down. It was still a quick strike. Zhuang Huanyu didn't feel the slightest bit of fear. His sword maneuvers were exquisite. His attacks were exceptionally wild due to his anger. But his defense was also extremely perfect. It could be seen that his mind wasn't in the slightest bit disturbed. No matter how fast Chen Changsheng's footwork was, no matter how direct and forceful the short sword strikes were, it couldn't find any openings, nor could it find any openings. On the contrary, Zhuang Huanyu's sword manifestation became increasingly calm. Countless sword flashes were like an invisible net, causing Chen Changsheng's footwork to become increasingly heavy. Even if he wanted to escape, it wouldn't be that easy. Chen Changsheng had calculated his intentions. Zhuang Huanyu wanted to use this sword maneuver to erase his advantage in speed, ultimately entering a contest of pure moves and true essence. He made a decision without hesitation. His movement technique abruptly changed, his speed reaching an inconceivable level. He took 3 steps to the right, but ultimately appeared on the other side of Zhuang Huanyu. Zhuang Huanyu turned his wrist and stabbed, an indescribably wondrous sword of the way, directly deflecting the short sword in Chen Changsheng's hand, then seized the opportunity to stab towards his throat. Chen Changsheng was suddenly in danger, but his expression didn't change because he had already arrived within Zhuang Huanyu's sword flashes. Now, no one could even think of dodging. He turned his body, allowing the sword of hithering light to pierce through his shoulder. The short sword in his hand directly swung towards Zhuang Huanyu's face. Zhuang Huanyu reversed the sword of hithering light, using its hilt to receive the blow. At the same time, he took a wrong step, the blade once again slashing towards his throat. In the blink of an eye, the situation of the battle had greatly changed. A concentrated clashing sound once again resounded within the tower. That was the sound of 2 swords clashing, but compared to the first round, this time the clashing of swords was endless, as if it would never stop. White clouds of air constantly formed, then exploded, then disappeared again. Whether it was Chen Changsheng or Zhuang Huanyu, both had decided to decide the victor. CA, 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 CA. 3 sounds of splitting resounded. Bam, bam. The sound of 2 solid blows rang out. The drizzle had stopped and the wet sand had fallen to the ground. Chen Changsheng and Zhuang Huanyu abruptly separated, retreating a distance of a dozen or so meters before standing still. Chen Changsheng had been stabbed 3 times. In addition to the previous sword wound, 6 sword wounds crisscrossed on his chest, dripping with blood, unbearable to look at. Zhuang Huanyu had been struck twice by his dagger. His right shoulder caved in slightly, and blood flowed out. His face was abnormally pale. The edge of the sword was peerless, while the rod was a blunt weapon. 3 swords in exchange for 2 rods, no matter how one looked at it. In this last exchange of swords, Zhuang Huanyu should have gained the upper hand. If it was anyone else who was Zhuang Huanyu's opponent, under these 3 swords, they would definitely be heavily injured, unable to continue fighting. Sheng didn't fall. Zhuang Huanyu wanted to use move against move, sword against sword, true essence against true essence. His response was even more unyielding, directly exchanging move for move, sword for sword, injury for injury. This was the method that Liang Ban who used to defeat Tang 36. It was a strategy that Gohan Shi came up with. It was used by him in this crucial match against Zhuang Huanyu. Chen Changsheng had always been someone who was willing to learn, someone who was good at learning. Moreover, for him to dare use this method, it showed that he had absolute confidence in his own true essence and defensive abilities. At the very least, it was stronger than Zhuang Huanyu's. Zhuang Huanyu also didn't fall, although his face was extremely pale. Their bodies were covered in blood. Separated by a distance of over 10 meters, they silently stared at each other. The tower of purging dust was silent. The VIPs by the window on the 2nd floor also maintained their silence. This match, to them, naturally didn't mean much, but the calmness and courage that Chen Changsheng and Zhuang Huanyu displayed in this match, far exceeding their age, caused them to be moved. Their silence at this moment, perhaps, represented a form of respect. Silence also represented nervousness. Who had won? Outside of the tower, it was also silent. The examinees outside the tower were even more nervous than those within, wanting to know who had won this match. Ever since Chen Changsheng and Zhuang Huanyu entered the tower, everyone's gazes fell upon that tightly shut door. Similar to the previous matches, the examinees couldn't see what was happening within the tower. They could only guess at what had happened through the sounds coming from within the tower. The tower's soundproof array, after the 2nd round, would often lose its effectiveness. This was because the participating examinees were getting stronger and the battles getting more and more intense. This match was the same. Not long after the door had closed, the examinees heard a shrill, piercing sound. They knew that it was the sound of a sword, but didn't know if it was Zhuang Huanyu's or Chen Changsheng's sword. Then, they heard a dull sound, as if someone was striking a bell within the tower. Some guessed that it was the sound of a fist imbued with true essence. What happened next became a little strange. Because the tower had suddenly quieted down, the sounds of cicadas could be heard from outside. Even the temperature had risen by a little, as if it was summer. And then, rain suddenly fell from the cloudless blue sky. That rain didn't wet a single inch of the ground outside the tower. It only fell within the tower, making it seem like a waterfall. Then, the sound of swords rang out again, without stopping, until finally, everything became silent. This match should have ended. Who had won and who had lost? The 3 from Orthodox Academy were the most nervous. The woodland's atmosphere was stifling. Xian Yuanpo widened his eyes, staring at the tightly shut door, continuously rubbing his hands, his forehead filled with sweat. Luo closed her eyes. Her small hands formed fists in front of her, silently praying for Chen Changsheng. Tang 36, with his hand behind his back, paced back and forth, his lips slightly moving, mumbling to himself. He didn't ask what Chen Changsheng's trump card was, or where his confidence came from. He knew that Chen Changsheng had definitely prepared for this match, but he also knew how strong Zhuang Huanyu was. Zhuang Huanyu was a senior from Heavenly Academy, and also someone he had always wanted to surpass. Only by getting closer could they clearly hear what he was muttering to himself in a low voice. Too optimistic, too optimistic. We've trusted him too much. How can we win? How can we win? You must win, but how can you win? At this moment, the door to the tower was pushed open. All the examinees simultaneously looked over. Luo opened her eyes, filled with hope and worry. Tang 36 stopped pacing. He also stopped muttering to himself, but he didn't look over because he didn't dare to. The first person to leave the tower was Chun Changsheng. His entire body was covered in blood. His feet were bare, his clothes were tattered, his body was covered in sand. Compared to the previous rounds, he looked more like a beggar. The area surrounding the stone plaza was still silent, because it was still unclear who the victor of this match would be. Guanfei Bai, after his equally desperate battle with Zhixio, was the first to leave the tower, but he was the loser. At this tense moment, Chun Changsheng suddenly turned around and entered the tower. The match had already ended. He had already left the tower. Why did he turn around again? Everyone was stunned. They didn't understand what was going on. Not long after, he once again walked out. This time, he had a pair of boots in his hands. A brand new pair of boots. A strange cry suddenly resounded. It was Tang 36's strange cry. On the surface, he didn't look, but in reality, his peripheral vision had always been looking in that direction. He let out a strange cry and charged towards Chun Changsheng. Luo let out a long breath, lightly patting her chest, her face filled with lingering fear and happiness. Xian Yuan didn't understand. Scratching his head, he asked, "What happened?" Luo said, "Master One, I have to go pick up my in-laws early tomorrow morning, so I'll try to sleep early. Good night, everyone. Sweet dreams." Chapter 168. At a time like this, he still hadn't forgotten about the boots he had previously dropped. This naturally meant that Chun Changsheng had won. As expected, Zhuang Huanyu didn't appear. The one who did was a Li Palace clergyman, who announced the result of the match. Under the astonished gazes of the examinees, Chun Changsheng lifted his boots and slowly walked down the stone steps barefooted. Tang 36 had already run up to him, supporting him, at the same time extending his hand to receive the new pair of boots from him. Chun Changsheng was a little embarrassed, saying, "You're too kind." Although he was embarrassed, he didn't refuse Tang 36's support. This was because he had sustained a rather heavy injury. Even though he had received treatment from the holy light within the tower, he was still very weak. Tang 36 sighed. "From today onwards, I probably only have the right to carry your shoes. Shouldn't I hurry up and curry favor with you?" This was a famous proverb in the Zhou dynasty. Tang 36 sighed. He was sad, but his eyes were filled with happiness. Xian Yuan and Luo also came over at this time. Within the tower, Zhuang Huanyu laid on a stretcher, his right shoulder slightly caved in, half of his body covered in blood, his eyes closed, his grayish-white lips slightly trembling, his fists tightly clenched. The room on the second floor was also very quiet. The personages were all silent, not knowing how to evaluate this match. Many matches had already ended in the grand examination. Chun Changsheng and Zhuang Huanyu weren't the strongest, nor was their match the most intense. If one were to compare the most intense and desperate, it would still be the silent match between Zhixio and Guanfei Bai. Similarly, this match wasn't the most spectacular. The match between Qi Jian and Liang Ban, who at Li Mountain, was the most spectacular. But this match was full of twists and turns. Chun Changsheng had actually once again entered initial meditation, breaking through on the spot, at the same time breaking Zhuang Huanyu's incomparably stable performance. It was very worthy of reflection. Outside of the tower, everyone's gazes fell upon the woodlands, a scene of silence. They didn't know how Chun Changsheng had won. Many speculations arose, making them even more shocked. Zhuang Huanyu was the pride of Heavenly Academy, the strongest of the capital schools. Even he couldn't stop Chun Changsheng's footsteps. Could it be that His Eminence's declaration that day at Li Palace would really become reality? Could it be that Chun Changsheng could really obtain first upon the first banner? The Mount Li Sword sect disciples by the stream were quiet for a very long time. Guanfei Bai looked at Chun Changsheng, who was helped by Luo to sit down under the poplar tree. He said emotionally, "You really live up to your reputation. In terms of Xiaoxing and battle, Chun Changsheng isn't famous, nor is he famous for being lucky. Therefore, this makes him seem even more extraordinary." Gohan sure looked at Chun Changsheng, who was leaning against the poplar tree with his eyes closed in rest, and silently thought to himself, a youth that didn't know how to cultivate or battle. Using only a few months' time, had grown to such an extent. How much time and effort had he put into this? It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he had burned his own life force, all for the sake of obtaining first upon the first banner. Was it worth it? The silence outside the tower was broken by the sound of coughing coming from the woodlands. Chun Chong Sheng leaned against the white poplar tree, coughing incessantly, appearing to be in extreme pain. With each cough, the sword wound on his chest would split open again, spilling blood. Relying on his indifference towards death, he had painstakingly defeated Zhuang Huanyu, but he had also paid a heavy price. It was obvious that before the end of the grand examination, his wounds wouldn't be able to recover. Luo hurriedly helped him bandage his wounds. Tang 36 followed his instructions and searched for medicine within his bag. Xian Yuan brought over a large bowl of water. Tang 36 also found the pills that Chun Chong Sheng needed. Chun Chong Sheng used the water to swallow a large handful of pills. He then tiredly closed his eyes and continued to regulate his breathing. Luo looked at his pale complexion. She couldn't bear to continue. She wanted to say something, but in the end, she didn't say anything. With Chun Chong Sheng's current condition and injuries, not to mention the possibility of encountering Gohan Shi, even any random examinee could easily defeat him. But she couldn't bring herself to say anything to persuade him not to continue fighting. Tang 36 and Xian Yuan couldn't say anything either. Even the Li Palace clergy that had previously seen the wounds on his body couldn't bear to persuade him to withdraw from the competition. That's right, the couldn't bear part wasn't that they couldn't bear to see him continue fighting despite being heavily injured, but rather they couldn't bear to see him persevere to this point, only to have him stop fighting. Chun Chong Sheng wouldn't stop fighting. The dueling for the grand examination wouldn't stop due to his injuries. The dueling continued. Gohan Shi entered the tower. Just like the previous rounds, he was as calm as the spring rain, defeating his opponent for this round, the young girl from Holy Maiden Peak. What made the people from Orthodox Academy feel increasingly uneasy was that, even at the final stage, Gohan Shi's opponent still hadn't been injured. This type of perfect control represented absolute strength. After Tian Haisheng Shui's withdrawal, the difference in strength between Gohan Shi and the other examinees was so great that it caused others to feel despair. Orthodox Academy could only place their hopes on Zhishio, who would be entering the competition next. The Wolf Tribe youth that was ranked third on the proclamation of Azure Clouds, according to the previous lot drawing. If he were to defeat his opponent for this round, he would then encounter Gohan Shi. In reality, amongst the examinees present, only he and Luo could pose a certain threat to Gohan Shi. Luo couldn't encounter Gohan Shi. He was her only choice. Zhishio's opponent for this round was a young officer from Star Caesar Academy. He didn't directly enter the tower. Instead, he walked towards the woodlands. Seeing this scene, the examinees were a little shocked. Recalling that Tang 36 had previously gone to find Zhishio, they couldn't help but feel curious as to what was going on. Zhishio walked to the woodlands, looked at Tang 36, and expressionlessly said, "Pay up." Hearing those two words, Luo and Xian Yuanpo's expressions slightly changed. Only then did they believe that Tang 36's words were true. Even Chun Chong Sheng opened his eyes. So, the Wolf Tribe youth that was known for being cold and lonely was actually someone who only cared about money. Tang 36 felt this especially strongly. He suppressed his voice and angrily said, "You want money for this type of opponent?" Zhishio's face remained expressionless. He even seemed a little sluggish, asking, "Why can't I? Can't you win for sure?" Tang 36 angrily said, "If I don't pay you, are you saying that you can't beat that guy?" Zhishio thought about it, then said, "But you want me to fight Gohan Shi?" Tang 36 said, "We'll discuss the price after the next round." Zhishio shook his head and said, "If I want to fight Gohan Shi, I have to first win this round, so you also have to pay for this round." Tang 36 looked at him like he was looking at a monster. Seeing that he didn't have any intention of changing his mind, he could only admit defeat. He took out a banknote from his sleeve and handed it over. Zhishio looked at the banknote, The number on it made him very satisfied. He gave a rare nod and said, "I'll do my best." After saying that, he left the woodlands and headed towards the tower. Luo widened her eyes, looked at Tang 36, and asked, "That's possible?" Xian Yuanpa looked at Zhixio's somewhat lonely back. He sucked in a breath of cold air and said, "That's possible? There were a lot of things to do today, so I started work a bit late. The next chapter will be even later. Students that need to wake up tomorrow shouldn't wait. I'll continue writing seriously." Chapter 169. Someone saw Tang 36 hand over a piece of paper to Zhixio, but no one connected it to a banknote. This was because the impression the Wolf Tribe youth left on the world couldn't be associated with money, just like Luo and Xian Yuanpa. Even though they had seen it happen, they still found it hard to believe. Zhixio walked into the Tower of Purging Dust. Zhixio walked out of the Tower of Purging Dust. His opponent did not walk out of the tower. Just like Gohan Shi, he once again welcomed an undisputed victory, but aside from the result, the process was much more controversial than Gohan Shi's, because his opponent was once again heavily injured and unable to get up, and was directly sent out of the education palace. The examinees' gazes followed him down the stone steps, arriving before the group from Orthodox Academy by the woodlands. Tang 36 was a little speechless. He said, "You registered as a student of Star Caesar Academy. You're still using the fake name of Zhang Ting Tao. That friend is your classmate. Do you have to be so heavy-handed?" Zhixio was silent for a while, as if he didn't understand why Tang 36 was concerned about this. Then he said, "I said I'd fight well." Tang 36's banknote made him very satisfied. That's why he had previously nodded to someone and promised to fight well. To the Wolf Tribe youth who didn't understand and didn't care about the ways of the world, fighting well meant fighting with all your strength. Then his opponent's fate could be imagined. "Then what are you doing here?" The examinees' gazes were focused on the woodlands. This made Tang 36 feel a little pressured. He didn't want the deal between Orthodox Academy and Zhixio to be known. It had nothing to do with honor. It was purely because he wanted to keep this a secret. Zhixio was a secret that could be bought with money. Zhixio was now the equivalent of a mercenary for Orthodox Academy. Such a powerful mercenary, it was obviously best if no one knew about it. "I'm here to discuss the price," said Zhixio. Tang 36 understood that he was referring to the next match. Without any surprises, Zhixio was up against Gohan Shi. Luo and Xian Yuanpa lowered their heads and looked at the grass on the ground, not saying a word, hiding their embarrassment. Chen Changsheng didn't. This was his business. If he was going to be ridiculed afterwards, he felt that the target of ridicule should be himself, not Tang 36. "The thing you want, I can't guarantee whether I have it or not, but I'll do my best to give it to you," he said while looking at Zhixio. Zhixio stared into his eyes, his expression indifferent, and said, "You must have it." Chen Changsheng said, "If there is, I will give it to you." Zhixio was quiet for a very long time, then said, "Yes." Then he looked at Tang 36. After a long silence, he said, "3 times?" Tang 36 paused for a second, and then came back to his senses. He suppressed his excitement and said calmly, "No problem." Zhixio nodded at him once more, then turned and walked out of the crowd. Looks like this guy only knows how to kill and doesn't know how to negotiate. Tang 36 looked at his back and sighed. Beating up Gohan Shi was only 3 times the price of beating up that Star Caesar Academy examinee. Zhixio's asking price really surprised him. Then he remembered something and turned around to look at Chen Changsheng. He frowned and asked, "You know what he wants?" It was obvious that the Wolf Tribe youngster was in need of money. This was only one of the reasons why he was willing to help the Tradition Academy. The most important reason was that he wanted something from Chen Changsheng. Chen Changsheng glanced at Luo and said, "I can roughly guess what he wants, but I'm not sure if I can help him." The last match of the quarterfinals was between Luo and the young scholar from Scholatry Manor, Zhonghui. As expected of the young genius ranked 9th upon the proclamation of Azure Clouds. Within the tower, Zhonghui displayed an extremely strong true essence cultivation and sword arts, successfully persisting for the time it takes for half an incense stick to burn. After the Li Palace clergyman announced the result, Zhonghui silently left the tower. Looking at the slightly lonely back of the young scholar from Scholatry Manor, Luo didn't feel anything. She quietly looked at the door, waiting for the arrival of her next opponent. She didn't leave the tower. She requested to fight the first match of the semifinals. The important figures on the second floor had to give her this bit of face. The door to the tower closed. After a while, it opened again. Hearing that creaking sound, Luo walked over and carefully helped her opponent inside. Her opponent for this round was Chun Changsheng. The floor that had been washed by the rain had some moist sand left on it. The stone steps that leaned against the walls of the round tower could be considered clean and also relatively dry. Luo helped Chun Changsheng to sit on the stone steps and passed him some water, feeding him a mouthful and saying, "How much longer before the medicine's effects disperse?" Chun Changsheng looked at the golden thread that was wrapped around his left hand's ring finger and said, "It's already a bit better. You don't have to worry. If it still doesn't work after a while, I'll think of something." Luo said, "Then you should rest a bit longer." Chun Changsheng looked towards the second floor, thinking to himself, "Is this appropriate? The Tower of Purging Dust is the arena for the grand examination. After examinees enter the tower, their minds would be focused on the battle, rarely having the opportunity to take a good look at the tower. At this time, he could take a good look, but he still felt a bit uneasy. Will people talk about it?" he asked, looking at Luo. Luo originally wanted to say that she wasn't afraid of others talking, but thinking of his cautious nature, her eyes turned slightly, and she said, "Then let's talk. What should they talk about? Has the great banyan tree within Orthodox Academy become thicker? Can they still see the general store at the entrance of Hundred Blossoms Lane while standing on the tree's arm? Was the snow accumulated within Heavenly Academy last winter thick? Sir, how did you defeat Zhuang Huanyu?" Luo asked a question that everyone was concerned about. Chun Changsheng thought for a while, then carefully explained the previous duel, not leaving out the majority of the details. Luo was naturally very shocked. She said with lingering fear, "Fortunately, there was that rain." Chun Changsheng nodded his head. Now that he thought about it, if that cold rain hadn't descended from the sky, even if he hadn't been burnt to death by the star brilliance, he would have been heavily injured by the high temperature. That rain, where did it come from? The Education Palace is within His Holiness Green Leaf World. Only His Holiness can make it rain here. Luo seemed to have thought of something. She stayed silent for a long time, then said, "Sir, this matter seems to be getting more and more complicated." Chun Changsheng remained silent. If the person who had caused that autumn rain was really the Pope, how could he explain it? He and Orthodox Academy were the main targets of the Orthodoxy's conservative faction. Everyone knew that the Orthodoxy's conservative faction, or rather, those important figures loyal to the imperial Qin family, were targeting Her Divine Majesty and His Holiness. Why did His Holiness help him? To be more accurate, to save himself? The entire continent knew. Orthodox Academy's new students, His Eminence's declaration, both contained many hidden problems. Chun Changsheng, as the person involved, was obviously more clear, but he had never thought about this aspect before. Firstly, it was because he didn't want to think about it. His goal had always been first upon the first banner. Whatever the important figures of the capital wanted to do had nothing to do with him. Secondly, he couldn't understand. The thoughts of those important figures weren't something a youngster like him could guess. At least, from the looks of it, it's beneficial for me. Chun Changsheng looked at Luo, who had a serious expression, and comforted her. Luo said, "I think perhaps we can take advantage of it." Chun Changsheng didn't quite understand. He asked, "How we take advantage of it?" Luo's gaze fell upon the sword wounds on his chest. She said, "Later, during the battle, try to take as many risks as possible." Chun Changsheng understood her meaning. If it was according to Luo's original intention, she definitely wouldn't have suggested that, but since Chun Changsheng had to take first upon the first banner, then it had to be done. She and Chun Changsheng didn't know what those important figures were thinking, but they knew what those important figures had already done. There were many important figures that wanted Chen Changsheng to fail, but there were also many important figures that didn't want Chen Changsheng to die. If His Holiness could cause the education palace to rain once, then he could cause more rain. Therefore, Chen Changsheng should take the risk, seeking life in the midst of death. Only then could he borrow the influence of those important figures, or perhaps borrow His Holiness' reign for a few more times. The so-called borrowing was taking advantage of the situation. Luo said uneasily, "But you have to be careful." Chen Changsheng reached out his hand and patted her hair, saying, "Don't worry, nothing will happen to me." Luo's expression was a little downcast. She said, "I'm sorry, I wasn't able to help you today." She had pleaded with His Holiness for an entire night. Only then could she participate in the grand examination. Placing had no meaning to her. What she needed to do was to protect and escort Chen Changsheng. For example, she had defeated Zhong Hui in the previous round. Only then could Chen Changsheng sit upon the stone steps and rest, not needing to face the supreme arts of scholarly manner with a heavily injured body. But in her eyes, this didn't mean much. Her targets were Tian Haisheng Shui and Gohan Shi. Tian Haisheng Shui had withdrawn from the competition because of her, but that still left Gohan Shi. The Tower of Purging Dust was very quiet. Outside of the tower, however, it was very lively, because no one was concerned with the outcome of the match within the tower. Everyone knew what Her Highness would do. The examinees formed groups of 2 or 3, discussing the previous match, discussing the possible placings, guessing how strong Chen Changsheng was, and how many moves he would be able to take from Gohan Shi. But as time passed, the Tower of Purging Dust remained quiet. That door still hadn't opened. The examinees began to feel bored from waiting. Some of them even began to feel sleepy. Guan Fei Bai looked towards the tightly shut door of the tower, angrily saying, "What kind of logic is this?" Liang Ban, who looked towards the woodlands, shaking his head and sighing. Even someone like Tang Tang feels embarrassed. Her Highness, how could she be so shameless? Gohan Shi remained silent, thinking about how Orthodox Academy, in order to allow Chen Changsheng to place first upon the first banner, would stop at nothing. That final match probably wouldn't be too simple. By the woodlands, Xin Yuan Po was crouching on the ground. Looking at something, Luo, who had previously been crouching with him, had now been replaced by Tang 36. Countless gazes fell upon them, making them feel pressured, embarrassed to raise their heads, too embarrassed to even speak. They could only hum and sing. "What's this?" Within the tower, by the window on the second floor, the Archbishop of the Holy Church looked at the youths on the steps, his expression extremely ugly. Chen Changsheng and Luo were chatting, master and disciple huddled together, whispering to each other. The scene was actually very pleasing to the eye, very young and moving. The problem was, this was the Tower of Purging Dust, the solemn arena for the grand examination, not Orthodox Academy's pond, nor the 100 Gardens melon trellis. Shuexing Chuan slightly frowned, saying, "This isn't appropriate." Prince Chun Lu really wanted to laugh, but out of consideration for the feelings of those present, he refrained from doing so. Mou's face was expressionless. She quietly looked at Chen Changsheng and Luo, her brows furrowed with impatience. Everyone knew what Luo's intentions were. She wanted to turn this match into a time for Chen Changsheng to rest and recover from his injuries. Naturally, the longer the better. Yet, the entire continent was anxiously awaiting the grand examination's final ranking. Could it be that however long she and Chen Changsheng wanted to rest, the world would have to wait? The most troublesome issue was the grand examination didn't have any rules to restrict this. Who said that both sides had to fight to the death right from the start? Who said that opponents couldn't appreciate each other's talents and have a chat? Luo and Chen Changsheng had countless reasons, or perhaps excuses, to stall for time, turning the match into a chat. The Archbishop of the Holy Church said angrily, "Your Highness, please hurry up. If you don't act, then the two of you will be judged to be passive and directly eliminated." The Li Palace clergyman accurately conveyed the Archbishop's message to the youths chatting on the steps. Luo was very angry, saying, "Can't you see we're accumulating our strength? Who dares to disqualify us?" The Li Palace clergyman really wanted to twitch his mouth, really wanted to say, "Your Highness, do you think the entire world is blind? Accumulating strength for an entire hour, accumulating it to the point where the two of them were shoulder to shoulder?" But he didn't dare to say anything. With a light, creaking sound, the window on the second floor was finally pushed open for the first time. Shui Xingchuan arrived at the arena, walked in front of Luo, smiled, and said a few words in a low voice. Luo still refused to get up and leave. Chun Chong Sheng said, "We've rested enough. Let's go out together. Don't make things difficult for His Excellency." Luo was the most obedient to him. She also knew that she couldn't occupy the tower for long, so she helped him up and walked out of the tower. Shui Xingchuan looked at the backs of the youths. He couldn't help but shake his head, appearing very helpless. Just like that, the first match of the Grand Examinations semifinals ended. Her Highness did as everyone expected, directly forfeiting, at the same time earning Chun Chong Sheng precious time to rest and recover. Chun Chong Sheng entered the finals of the Grand Examination. He was one step closer to the goal that had once been the laughingstock of the entire continent. Only this process seemed a little absurd. But he didn't care. Luo didn't care either. The further it went, the faster the Grand Examinations matches progressed. This was because the abilities of the two combatants were getting stronger and stronger. Even if the difference was only a sliver, victory or defeat would only take a few moves. After the second round, the time required for each match was extremely short, otherwise, it wouldn't have been possible for it to reach the final moments so quickly. Chun Chong Sheng and Luo's match had taken up a full hour, longer than the previous 10 matches combined. Of course, everyone knew that this was a special situation. Only someone with a special status like Her Highness could do this. Yet, just when everyone believed that this would be the longest battle of this year's Grand Examination, the second match between Gohan Shi and Zhixio in the semifinals once again brought boundless shock to everyone. This was because this battle had lasted for a very long time, and from the looks of it, it seemed that it would continue for even longer, with a high possibility of surpassing an hour. Hearing the terrifying sounds that occasionally resounded from within the tower, Tang 36's expression became more and more serious. The respect in his eyes became more and more concentrated. He turned towards Chun Chong Sheng and said seriously, "Aside from your life, whatever that wolf cub wants from you, just give it to him. I'm really tired. I want a few recommendation tickets from you. Just give them to me." Chapter 170. Time continued to pass. The expressions of the examinees outside the tower became more and more grave. The shock in their eyes became more and more intense. They didn't know when the outcome of this match would be decided. After Tian Haixing Shui's departure, Gohan Shi and Zhixio were without a doubt the two strongest amongst the examinees present, no matter how they looked at it. This match shouldn't have lasted for so long. This match had lasted for so long. It wasn't the same as Chun Chong Sheng and Luo's match. The sounds that came from within the tower never stopped. Sometimes it was like thunder. Sometimes it was like a massive wave crashing into the air. Gorgeous clouds would occasionally appear in the dark blue sky. This was a scene of the miniature world being disturbed by true essence. These sounds and scenes were proof of how intense the battle within the tower was. It was quiet outside the tower. Everyone stared at the tightly shut door and listened to the sounds that came from within. They were all extremely nervous. They didn't know what was going on within. When the time finally passed by an hour, even the faces of the 3 disciples of Lishan's sword sect started to show signs of worry. After Tang 36 said that to Chun Chong Sheng, he didn't say anything else. His expression became more and more grave. His gaze became more and more serious. He stood straighter and straighter, as if he wanted to use this to express his respect toward a certain someone. An hour passed. The battle still continued. Xin Yuanpo looked towards Tang 36 and asked, "What do you know? Nothing's going to happen, right?" Tang 36 was silent for a moment before saying, "That wolf cub is fighting with his life on the line." In the previous match, Zhixio had taken the banknote and nodded his head in satisfaction, indicating that he would fight well. Thus, he had sent that fellow student from Star Caesar Academy, flying out of the education palace. Before this match, he hadn't said anything, but reality had proven that he was fighting with his life on the line. There were many ways to battle. Fighting well was one. Fighting with his life on the line was another. No matter how strong Jishio was, there was still an insurmountable gap between him and Gohan Shure, who had already completed his ethereal opening. If he didn't fight with his life on the line, how could he have lasted for so long? Sheng hadn't said anything. He understood why Tang 36 had suddenly said those words to him. The will to fight that Jishio had displayed and the price he had paid was obviously not something that could be bought with a mere banknote. The mercenary had started fighting with his life on the line, proving that he really wanted that item. Wolves are the most persevering and enduring animals in the world. Luo listened to the sounds that occasionally resounded within the tower. Her small face revealed an unbearable expression as she said, "In the past, when Jishio first hunted a demon warrior, he was only 11 years old. That time, he chased that demon warrior on the snowy plains during winter for 3 months. Only when the demon warrior was exhausted and weak did he successfully kill it." Chen Sheng thought to himself that the patience and endurance of the wolf tribe was indeed extremely strong. What he did not realize was that this was only the most glamorous part of the story. After a moment of silence, Luo continued, but no one knew that at that time, the hidden illness in his body suddenly broke out. Coupled with the fact that he hadn't eaten for more than 10 days and only drank some snow water, it could truly be said that he was only one step away from death. If that demon warrior hadn't collapsed and given up, perhaps he would have been the first to die. The forest was quiet. Tang 36 looked at the tightly shut door of the tower and said with a complex expression, "The Wolf Cub's dictionary doesn't contain the words give up and benevolence." If it wasn't for the limited space within the tower and the restrictions placed on battles, if he and Gohan Shure were to have a battle of life and death in the real world, I really don't know who would have been able to last until the end. Chen Sheng looked towards the tower, remaining silent. Above the round tower, the layers of clouds in the dark blue sky were torn to shreds. Mournful cries could be heard from time to time. It was unknown whether it was the howling of the wind or the howling of a wolf, each sound startling. His gaze fell upon the door, but it was as if he could see within the tower. He could see the expressionless Jishio and Gohan Shure silently battling, the blood on their fingers slowly dripping onto the ground. Standing at the scene of the grand examination, it was as if he could see the past, a thin and weak youth silently, stealthily amidst the wind and snow. His body that was extremely weak due to a serious illness was on the verge of collapse. But on the youth's young and tender face, there wasn't a hint of fear or cowering. He stared at the back of the burly demon warrior in front of him, waiting for the other to fall before him. His eyes were filled with hatred and perseverance, looking like a wolf, because he was a wolf tribe youth. Just as Tang 36 had said, if Jishio and Gohan Shure were to have a battle of life and death in the real world, it was hard to say who would be able to last until the end. However, the education palace was a miniature world, not the real world, so the one that could last until the end was still Gohan Shure, this mountain disciple that was born from a poor family, but was well-versed in the scripture of the way. A creaking sound that was somewhat ear-piercing, the tightly shut door of the tower slowly opened. Gohan Shure slowly walked out from within. Arriving upon the stone steps, he painfully coughed twice. His face was a little pale, and his steps were a little slow. Guan Fei Bai and Liang Ban, who went up to greet him. Qi Jian was anxiously searching through his luggage for medicine. Jishio also walked out of the tower. But he didn't walk out on his own. Rather, he was carried out. Blood continuously dripped down from the sides of the stretcher, a rather ghastly sight. His pale face was devoid of any expression. He looked very calm. His eyes were tightly shut. It was impossible to tell what he was currently thinking. He was like a wolf, following Gohan Shure in a silent and unwavering battle for over an hour, causing Gohan Shure to suffer rather heavy injuries. But he had also paid a heavy price for it. With his current injuries, it was impossible for him to continue battling. It could even be said that his life was in danger. He should have been sent out of the education palace to receive treatment. But previously, within the tower, when the Li Palace clergyman in charge of the match was about to make such an arrangement, he was forced back by the apathetic expression and persistence in the youth's eyes. He could only carry him out of the tower. To be able to force Gohan Shi to such a state, Zhishio had earned the respect of all the examinees present. But in the end, the word respect was based on the word fear. Everyone stared at the bleeding stretcher and the person within it. They remained silent. Not a single person went forward to express concern or comfort him. He was participating as a student of Star Caesar Academy, but in the previous round, he had directly crippled a fellow student from Star Caesar Academy. Now Star Caesar Academy couldn't be bothered with him. The Li Palace clergyman carried the stretcher. Looking at the examinees outside of the tower, they didn't know where to send him. At this moment, Chun Chong Sheng supported himself against the white poplar tree and stood up with difficulty. Luo understood his intentions. She patted Xian Yuan Po's back, indicating for him to go forward and take back the stretcher. Xian Yuan Po didn't dare to have any objections. He went forward and single-handedly took the stretcher. The stretcher arrived at the woodlands. Zhishio quietly laid upon it, his face pale and his body covered in blood, unable to move or speak, but he opened his eyes, appearing to be very calm. With a tearing sound, Xian Yuanpa began to bandage his wounds. Chun Chong Sheng fed him medicine. Luo looked at him. Her emotions were a little complicated. Tang 36 sighed. Is there a need to fight so bitterly? Zhishio looked at him, expressionlessly saying, add money. The Zhishio mentioned here is naturally Zheng Haonan from the underworld. Cool. Today's 2,000 words. Chapter 171. Before the white crane landed, Chun Chongsheng had already noticed the abnormality in the small courtyard. As he sensed the remaining foul qi, his heart sank, as it was clearly left behind by the Yellow Springs art. Soon after, he noticed a few traces of fire. He couldn't help but think of a possibility, but he quickly rejected it. Why had Chusu come to this small courtyard? Just who had this battle taken place between him and... Qin Changshang glanced at the unconscious Xian Yuan Pa, many questions rising in his mind, but the situation was too tense, leaving him no time to think too much. He had no idea that on the nearby eaves of the Celestial Tree Temple, she was looking at him. Qin Changsheng walked past the broken door and the blackened scraps of paper into the room, and saw Bi Yanghong and Wu Qiongbai. Madame Mu had said that Bi Yanghong and Wu Qiongbai were already dead. So why were they still alive, and why were they in Xian Yuan Po's small courtyard? Just what had happened? In his shock, Chun Changsheng had no time to think. With a forceful wave of his hand, several hundred swords flew out of his sheath in a single line. With a clear cry of swords, they broke through the window and formed a South Stream temple sword array that tightly surrounded the small courtyard. Only now did he relax a little and place Xian Yuan Po on the floor. Bianghong was also very shocked, but he was even more worried about the unconscious Xian Yuan Po. Seeing that Qin Changsheng was about to treat his injuries, he extended a hand to stop him. Take a look at him first. How did he suffer such heavy injuries? Is he in danger? Wu Qiongbai couldn't help but say, this bear cub's skin is rough and his flesh is thick. What does it matter if he gets cut a few times? Bianghong glanced at her, a tinge of anger finally appearing in his eyes. Wu Qiongbai felt quite wronged, thinking, I'm just worried that your injuries will be difficult to treat if we drag them out. But when she met his gaze, she did not dare say anything. He was injured by the heavenly tome monoliths, affected by the power of the world. If he can wake up, he can still hold on. Chun Changsheng repeated the judgment he had made on the observation platform. Ignoring Bi Yanghong's attempts to stop him, he kneeled in front of him and began to feel his pulse. As time passed, his expression grew more and more grim, his fingers replaced by needles. After some time, he took out the needles, somewhat hesitant as to whether or not he should say something. Bi Yanghong said nothing, only patted Chun Changsheng on the shoulder. Only now did Chun Changsheng realize that he already knew. Please take a look at my wife's injuries. Bi Yanghong had an extremely high cultivation level, so he had basically confirmed the state of his wife's injuries, but Chen Chongsheng's medical skill was universally acknowledged, so he wanted to confirm it. Chen Chongsheng turned to Wu Qiongbai and indicated for her to cooperate with him. Wu Qiongbai's expression was rather awkward, or perhaps uncomfortable. It's not a big deal. I just need to rest and recuperate. Wu Qiongbai had lost an arm and appeared to be grievously injured, but Chen Chongsheng had clearly judged that her injuries were far lighter than Bianghong's. One could imagine just how many dangers Bianghong had blocked for her in the battle between the divine. If he had not blocked those terrifying attacks for Wu Qiongbai, things would definitely not be like this. Since they were husband and wife, it was natural for the husband to do these things for his wife. Chen Chongsheng was still in a rather bad mood, perhaps unwilling, just like the vast majority of people felt about this couple. Moreover, it was clear that Wu Qiongbai still did not know what was going on, did not know what Bianghong had done for her, what he had endured, and what he was about to endure. She was still nagging. Under Bianghong's gaze, Wu Qiongbai did not dare to say any obscenities, but it was still very vexing. Why did her husband have to bear everything while she could live like this? Chen Chongsheng raised his head and gave Bianghong a profound glance. Bianghong shook his head, his movements so small that if one was not staring, it would be very difficult to notice. Wu Qiongbai did not notice, but for some reason, perhaps because she had been affected by the mood, she finally grew quiet. The room became very quiet. Chen Chongsheng recalled the lotus sea in the mausoleum of books, the red flower, the heaven-shaking might of this couple. And then he looked at them powerlessly leaning against the wall, their pale faces, and suddenly felt very sad. Who was it? If the White Emperor was truly in secluded cultivation, not caring about outside matters, not even Madame Mu and the demi-human experts would have been able to force Bianghong and Wu Qiongbai into this state. Moreover, Madame Mu had personally said in the imperial city that she had not done anything. So just who could wound Bianghong and Wu Qiongbai like this? Was it Black Robe and the demon commander, as he had guessed? Or was it the legendary 8 great mountain men? Bianghong knew that he still had time, and he also knew that the following conversation would be extremely important to the human race in determining the future situation. Thus, he was in no rush to say the name of his opponent, but very seriously and logically began to recount his entire experience. We followed the deep freeze dragon breath and saw Lady Zhu under the 3rd celestial tree from the left. Chen Chongsheng finally knew the little black dragon's specific location. He thought to himself, it was probably the legendary heavenly flames of the desolate tree that had cut off her mental connection to him. Bianghong continued, we saw Madame Mu and Mu Jiushi, and also Black Robe. Even though he had anticipated this, Chen Chongsheng was still shocked to hear this name. Who else of the demons came? None, just Black Robe alone. Chen Chongsheng could not understand. If Madame Mu had only activated the seal to prevent communication and had not truly attacked Bianghong and his wife, then Black Robe alone should not have been able to wound Bianghong and Wu Qiongbai to such a degree. This enigmatic demon military advisor was unquestionably a true expert, his strength unfathomable. But Bianghong was also no ordinary expert of the divine domain, especially in the years after the coup of the Mausoleum of Books. His strength had risen once more, and he seemed to be on the verge of becoming the leader of the storms of the 8 directions. Given another 200 years, he might even be able to break through the Saint Realm and enter the concealed divinity realm. The demons did not send anyone else, but the sacred light continent did. Bianghong slowly said, 2 angels of the sacred light came. One is in charge of judgment, which I would like to call hidden thunder. The other is in charge of war, which I would like to call flames of fury. The 2 do not understand the Tao, but they can transform the laws of the world for their own use. They are naturally divine, and purely in terms of fighting power, they are similar to me. Chen Chongsheng was truly shocked. For a long time, he was speechless. Without waiting for him to ask any further questions, Bianghong spoke again. His expression was abnormally serious. It was clear that he hoped that Chen Chongsheng would remember every word he said. If you meet them, please kill them. With these words, a powerful killing intent surged, like a banner or spear, piercing through the courtyard and reaching the heavens. At the same time, Byung-hong's finger pressed against Chun Changsheng's brow. To be continued. Chapter 172. Byung-hong was heavily injured and moved very slowly. Chun Changsheng could have easily dodged, but he did not, because he trusted in his opponent. Wu Qianbai stared at this sight and thought of something. She was shocked and wanted to stop it, but she recalled Byung-hong's previous words and did not dare. An incomparably warm and mellow qi, like that of fine wine, followed Byung-hong's finger into Chun Changsheng's forehead and poured in. The sea of consciousness was just below the forehead. Otherwise, Nang's eyes would not have widened further and further. Countless rays of light illuminated Chun Changsheng's gloomy sea of consciousness, then transformed into countless images. They were scenes of Byung-hong's battle with the two angels on the plateau and in the sky. Those images were very clear and vivid, as if they were right in front of his eyes. They were incomparably real. The scenes from the first-person perspective allowed him to stand in Byung-hong's position and personally experience everything that had happened. He saw Mu Jiushi fleeing in fear, saw the calm and graceful Madame Mu. There was a tree on the edge of the cliff. The breeze lifted the shadow of the tree, forming a corner of the black robe. There were clouds in the sky, and as the clouds parted, light descended upon the world. Inside the light were two powerful beings from a foreign continent. They had pure white wings and were genderless. They emitted a holy light and an incomparably powerful aura, making it impossible for others to look at them directly. They seemed extremely arrogant, but in reality, they did not have any positive or negative human emotions. Between their brows was an indifference that transcended the mortal world. In a way, they were perfect. They were the angels of the sacred light continent. Chun Changsheng also heard their voices. They were probably using the language of the sacred light continent, their tones strange and complex. Because these scenes had been created by Byung-hong's spiritual sense, their voices had not been transformed by a breeze into the language of the continent, as they had been on that day. Chun Changsheng understood a little. The language of the sacred light continent was somewhat similar to that of the dragon race. When he was reciting the last volume of the 3,000 scriptures of the Taoist canon in Xining Village's old temple, he was already extremely familiar with the language of the dragon race. More importantly, he had once studied under New North Bridge with Gigi for a very long time. The one who stole the fire source? What did that mean? Just as he was pondering this question, the two angels from the sacred light continent attacked. A straight line of light appeared in front of him, cutting the sky into two parts. As the ray of light turned back in defiance of the laws and principles of heaven and earth, it landed from another angle. The two angels attacked faster and faster, and so did the light. The sky was gradually cut into countless fine fragments. Countless wondrous attacks emerged one after another, and unimaginable angles of attack appeared one after another. Even with Chun Changsheng's level, it was getting harder and harder to see all the details, but he still perceived many things from it. It was the true experience and wisdom gained from his battle with the two angels. It was the red flower illuminating the sky and severing the trajectories of light. It was the mark left behind by that fist that had shattered the clouds and disregarded the laws of the world. Through Byung-hong's fingertip, it all entered his sea of consciousness. As time passed, the rays of light became denser and denser. They crisscrossed and intersected, gradually forming a blazing white. A boom resounded in Chun Changsheng's sea of consciousness. Countless huge waves were born, constantly crashing against the invisible but bounded embankment. Chun Changsheng woke up. Apart from a slight ache in his sea of consciousness, he didn't feel any other discomfort. Then he felt a little hot. More accurately, the surface of his body was boiling hot. He performed meditative introspection and realized that all paths in his ethereal palace were connected. The snowy plain of star radiance was burning. The fire was not very fierce, but the surface of the vast snowy plain was burning, the dark blue flames extending into the distance. Byung-hong's finger had left his brow, but the experience from that battle, and even more importantly, the understanding and wisdom of an expert of the divine domain regarding the laws of the world, as well as the intense desire to fight and even to kill those two angels from the sacred light continent, all remained in his sea of consciousness. Without question, this was Chen Changsheng's best state since the Garden of Zhou's 10,000 swords forming dragon. The several hundred swords, quietly floating outside the room, sensed his change. The swords trembled and let out a low hum. All of White Emperor City felt a peerlessly powerful and awe-inspiring sword intent. The priests and bear warriors in the streets subconsciously retreated even further away. After some time, Chen Changsheng opened his eyes and suppressed the desire to fight. The awe-inspiring sword intent enveloping the small courtyard also receded. He knew that on the long path of cultivation, the wisdom that Bianghong had left in his sea of consciousness would help him avoid many detours. And if he were to encounter those experts from the sacred light continent, the experience and desire to fight in his sea of consciousness would help him obtain even more strength. Bianghong glanced at the unconscious Xin Yuanpe and said, "I once mentioned to him the fist style I used in my battle with those two. In the future, if he still has any interest in or questions about this path, I would like to ask your holiness to help me instruct him." He was very fond of this bear youth and felt that there was fate between them. Coupled with the fact that the two of them had received a favor from him, he had given him some pointers yesterday. He had originally planned to truly teach this fist style to Xin Yuanpe today, but now it seemed that he could only entrust it to Chen Changsheng. Chen Changsheng replied, "He has always been a person of the Orthodox Academy. Please be at ease, senior." In those images, he had seen the appearance and fighting style of the two angels, but he still had many questions, especially the sacred light exuded by those two angels, which he was far too familiar with. His flesh and blood were filled with this sacred light. Was this the origin of the name Foreign Continent? The 3,000 scriptures of the Taoist canon did not have many records of the distant and mysterious sacred light continent. Only a few extremely ancient texts would mention it in the name of myth. As a child, Chen Changsheng had been well-versed in the Taoist canon and had read many books. He might have been born on the sacred light continent, but in the first 10-some years of his life, he had no understanding of the sacred light continent. At the very beginning, he did not even know of the existence of the sacred light continent. Only when Su Li left with the Holy Maiden of the South, and he and Su Yurong discussed the possible whereabouts of these two seniors on the Bridge of Helplessness, did he have this idea. And only during the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, when he followed the Tianhai Divine Empress's eyes and saw that monk, did he confirm that the sacred light continent truly existed. The descendants of the deceased really had fled to that side, and there were also countless experts beneath the starry sky. And then came that night in the snowy mountains. That mighty demon lord who had once almost dominated the continent had died under a pillar of light from that side of the starry sky. That pillar of light had shaken the entire continent, and it had also made Chen Changsheng extremely vigilant and uneasy. He had not forgotten what the Tianhai Divine Empress had done before her death. She had ignited the last of her soul to heavily injure that monk by the Sheening Stream, completely uncaring that her legacy had been severed. At the time, no one understood why she had done this. Now, Chen Changsheng understood. To be continued. Chapter 173. Chen Changsheng still didn't understand some things. On that night, in the Mausoleum of Books, the monk from the other continent had not come in his true body, but had used some sort of method to arrive as a soul. The two angels from the sacred light continent that Bianghong had encountered were clearly physical. So how had they gotten here? If it was so easy to travel between the two continents, why hadn't anyone from the sacred light continent appeared before? He posed his question to Bianghong, and then he asked how the descendants had been able to escape to the sacred light continent, and what method had they used. More importantly, what was the relationship between the demon race and the sacred light continent? Bianghong did not give a specific answer, as he was not confident that his conjecture was correct and did not want to affect Chen Changsheng's judgment. He said to Chen Changsheng, "Regarding these matters, you should ask your teacher." There was nothing wrong with these words. Shang Xingzhou was definitely the person in this world who understood the sacred light continent the most. He had picked up Chen Changsheng by the stream, driven away the golden dragon, and invited the soul of the monk from the exiled tribe to this world to attack the Tianhai divine empress. His shadow, or rather, his participation, could be found in all matters concerning the sacred light continent. And those events were all related to Chen Changsheng. He didn't know what to say. Bianghong solemnly warned him, "Your Holiness must be careful." Chen Changsheng understood his meaning. In the battle between the divine 2 days ago, Madame Mu and the demons had openly encircled and killed the human experts. Even more alarming was that this had involved the other races in space. The human race had to give the strongest response, and, as the Pope, Chen Changsheng naturally had to shoulder this responsibility, but he also had to face enormous pressure. Most importantly, he had to figure out what Shang Xingzhou was thinking. Those were things for the future. He had a lot of things to deal with now. Chen Changsheng glanced at Wu Qianbai. Wu Qianbai fiercely glared back. Chen Changsheng drew back his gaze and asked Bianghong, "You really don't need to say anything?" Bianghong shook his head. Chen Changsheng once again looked at the unconscious Xian Yuan Po. Xian Yuan Po's body was extremely sturdy, and his face was covered with a beard. He looked a little old, but in reality, he was the youngest in the Tradition Academy. Chen Changsheng, Tang 36, Su Mou, Zhixio, and the others liked to tease Xian Yuan Po and doted on him. He didn't know when Xian Yuan Po would wake up. Chen Changsheng walked out of the courtyard and told the Archbishop of the Western Waste that no one was allowed to take a step into the alley. The Archbishop softly assented. He did not ask the foolish question of what to do if someone came. Since no one was allowed to step into the alley, not even the White Emperor and Madame Mu, Shang Xingzhou, or the Emperor could enter. Sensing the qi of several dozen experts in the streets of the pine paths, as well as the clear qi of Li Palace's array, Chen Changsheng felt somewhat relieved. With the cry of a crane, he rode the white crane and flew into the sky. The hundreds of swords around the courtyard whistled through the air and followed him. He knew that everything should be fine over there, but he still couldn't help but feel worried and nervous. Thus, he did not notice that the white crane had glanced at the celestial tree temple before it left, as if it was asking for instructions from someone. Upon confirming that Chen Changsheng had left, Wu Qianbai instantly regained her spirit and roared at Bianghong, "Is there something wrong with your head? What if something happens?" This was referring to the fact that Bianghong had used only one finger to transmit the experience and wisdom of that battle between the divine to Chen Changsheng. This was a technique that had been secretly passed down in Shiling's 10,000 Years Pavilion for more than 7,000 years. It was called the Dot of Red. A teacher could use this method to directly transmit the knowledge of cultivation to their disciples. This sort of Taoist technique was very mystical, but it was also dangerous. The slightest carelessness would result in a backlash from the Taoist technique. In the past, only before the Grand Examination or the opening of the Garden of Zhou would the 10,000 Years Pavilion choose the most outstanding but inexperienced students to use this technique on. If this Taoist technique was used to transmit energy to later generations of disciples, it was even more dangerous. Death was basically assured for both the user and the recipient. For this reason, in the last 7,000 years, this sort of thing had only happened twice in Shiling's 10,000 Years Pavilion. As she watched Bianghong's finger land on Chen Changsheng's forehead, Wu Qianbai was truly rather worried. Her anger was also rather reasonable. Bianghong quietly gazed at her, saying nothing. Wu Qianbai suddenly recalled that in the last 2 days he had often quietly gazed at her like this, and then recalled that in the last 2 years he had often quietly gazed at the distant mountains. She then recalled the words that the people of the world had said to the two of them, and the words that those people had used their eyes to say, like Wang Per and the others. She suddenly felt flustered and uneasily shut her mouth. Bianghong had been married to her for many years, so he naturally knew what she was thinking. He faintly smiled and rubbed her head. Wu Qianbai felt even more flustered, because although Bianghong had still respected and protected her in the last few years, It had been a very long time since he had made such an intimate gesture. In order to dispel her unease, she somewhat stiffly changed the subject, asking, "Why didn't you tell him that Su Yurong came?" The holy maiden did not appear, indicating that she did not want Qin Changxing to know, so it was naturally inconvenient for me to say anything. Byung Hong thought this over, then earnestly said, "In the future, you must treat His Holiness and the Holy Maiden a little more respectfully." Wu Qiongbai angrily retorted, "I can't be bothered to do these hypocritical things. In any case, they won't do anything out of respect for you. Are you really prepared to abandon me?" Byung Hong said nothing, only sighed. Wu Qiongbai recalled his previous actions and once more became uneasy. She mumbled, "If worst comes to worst, I'll just change my temper and kill a few less people." Byung Hong still said nothing. Wu Qiongbay's expression turned unsightly. "Could it be that you really intend to cast me aside?" The more she thought about it, the more she felt that it was true. Anxious and angry, tears began to stream down her face, and then she began to curse. To Byung Hong, the contents of her curses were truly nothing new. Over and over again, it was the same words: "Heartless old scoundrel, ungrateful poor scholar. If not for me back then, what would have happened?" But just when he was truly beginning to get angry, Wu Qiongbai wept and said, "I don't have an arm now, and I don't even have a son. If you leave, what will happen to me?" Byung Hong sighed and took her into his embrace, lightly patting her back to prevent her from crying herself to death. Her temper was just this great. He had always known that there was nothing he could do about it. After some time, Wu Qiongbai grew tired from crying and cursing. Leaning against his chest, she fell into a deep sleep. Even in her sleep, her left hand tightly gripped his collar, as if afraid that he would just quietly leave. Byung Hong did not sleep. He quietly gazed at her face, his thoughts inscrutable. The clouds over the mountains dispersed. The faint sound of waves could be heard from below the distant cliff. Qin Changxing walked down from the white crane and walked forward. In front of him was a celestial tree that towered into the clouds. At the base of the tree was a large hole. Inside was a small house. A black-clothed girl quietly stood in front of the house. To be continued. Chapter 174. The black-clothed girl was naturally the little black dragon. As the protector, she had a spiritual sense connection with Qin Changxing that was difficult to sever. Thus, even though she had remained silent, Qin Changxing could confirm that she was safe. But this connection had been cut off by the wildfire of the celestial tree, making it impossible for Qin Changxing to determine her exact location. But with Byung Hong's directions, finding her was extremely easy. The celestial tree was so tall that even its hollow could hold a house, so the little black dragon's body was naturally even more delicate and delicate. Qin Changxing's gaze fell on her ankle. When he saw the chain, he couldn't help but recall the scene he had often seen at the bottom of New North Bridge, and his heart sank. The little black dragon looked at him and asked, "Why did you come so late?" Qin Changxing was brimming with apologies, but he didn't know how to explain. The little black dragon's gaze passed over his shoulder and fell on the white crane, and her face instantly turned as cold as ice. Qin Changxing did not notice the change in her mood, and even if he did, he probably wouldn't understand the reason. He walked up to Zhu Sha and squatted down, beginning to study the chain that imprisoned her. A rain of swords came from the bottom of the tree. In an extremely short amount of time, 10 some famed swords, the stainless sword included, had descended, but they were unable to sever the chain. Unlike the chains at the bottom of New North Bridge, this chain was not shrouded in a divine aura to isolate attacks. Instead, it seemed to have fused with the entire cliff. There seemed to be some sort of array hidden within that could divert all attacks that landed on the chains to the cliff itself. In other words, if he wanted to sever the chain, he needed to destroy the entire cliff. Destroying this cliff was not something impossible for the current Qin Changxing. The problem was that it could shake the foundation of the celestial tree. What would he do if the wildfire spewed out of ground? He could ride the white crane to escape, but could he just watch as the little black dragon was swallowed up by the wildfire? Since he couldn't, he could only think of another way to break the array. He thought of the name of this seal and wondered if there was some sort of explanation for it. The little black dragon snapped. The White Emperor clan has always been white tigers, and this thing is used to imprison their own clansmen. Isn't it only right that it has this name? Chun Changsheng said. Luo Luo is looking for the key. I'm just worried that it'll take too long. If the tiger paw is also an array, I want to write a letter to Yu Rong. She should be able to think of a way. Back then, he had asked Su Yu Rong for guidance on how to break the seal at the bottom of New North Bridge. Although it had been the Pope who had acted in the end, she truly was formidable in this aspect. The frosty expression on the little black dragon's face completely vanished as she angrily yelled, "Riding another woman's crane to save me. You can even do something like that." Chun Changsheng was stunned and asked, "What is it?" The little black dragon was even angrier, shouting, "You still want her to save me? She had to save me twice. What kind of brain do you have?" Chun Changsheng truly felt that his brain was not very good, because he had no idea why the little black dragon was so angry or what it meant. He and the black dragon had lived in the snowy mountains of the northern border for 3 years, eating, walking, and living together. They were already extremely close, but there were many times when he still did not quite understand her intentions. Ride another woman's crane? She had to save him twice? What kind of matter was this? He subconsciously explained, "She's my fiancée, so there's no need to be polite." The black dragon hatefully retorted, "You're my first man, so why have you been so polite to me all these years?" The highest point of the celestial tree was already far above the clouds. The sunlight shone upon the branches, creating a golden glow. It was a very beautiful sight. A pair of pure white wings slowly folded. Su Yu Rong stood on a branch, her wings lightly swaying in the wind. She stretched out her hand and plucked a fire berry from the leaves, her bright eyes brimming with curiosity. She carefully took a bite, and after a long while, she nodded in satisfaction. In the next moment, her expression subtly changed, no longer so satisfied. It was not because the chi of the wildfire contained in this legendary fireberry was too thick, harming her, but because she had heard the conversation carried over by the wind from below. Riding my crane to see another woman is one thing, but it's 2 of them. Mo, you really didn't lie to me back then. There really is a problem between you and them. Chun Changsheng came to his senses and knew where the problem lay. It had been a very long time since they had met at the bottom of New North Bridge. He had long ago known what had happened and what she had always been thinking. At the time, he had braved the immense danger of meditative introspection and ignited the snowy plains formed from star radiance, almost burning them into nothingness. At that crucial moment, the black dragon had cut open her forehead and used the true blood of the frost dragon to save him. And it was the most precious and purest first blood. According to the rules of the dragon race, she had chosen Chun Changsheng to be her husband by doing this. In the following years, especially those 3 years on the snowy plains of the northern frontier, she had always been thinking about this matter. She was the one Chun Changsheng should be most grateful to for being able to live to this day. But even though he could have used his life without hesitation to save her, he found it impossible to accept this matter, because he already had an engagement, even if that engagement had been annulled midway. Previously, he had simply not known how to face this situation, so he had subconsciously stopped himself from thinking in that direction. In truth, this sort of conversation, brimming with hatred and apology, had taken place many times between him and the Black Dragon. In the end, it still ended with his silence. In the end, it was still the Black Dragon who broke this silence. "You good-for-nothing thing you don't dare to marry too? Including Luo Luo, that's only 3. You, the Pope, can't even raise them? Are you that afraid of Su Yurong?" She sneered at Chun Changsheng. "Let's not talk about this. Go do what you need to do, but be careful. Don't force Madame Mu into a corner, or else she really will dare to kill you." Chun Changsheng worriedly asked, "Then what will you do?" The Black Dragon proudly replied, "No one dares to kill a noble black frost dragon on the shores of the Red River." Chun Changsheng did not completely believe this. He knew that the demi-human race truly did have to thank the Black Frost Dragon tribe for their assistance in establishing their country. But ungrateful people were common, And who could guarantee that Madame Mu would not go crazy? But there was truly no point in him staying here. He thought it over, then said sorry. The black dragon helplessly said, Chun Chong Sheng, I am your protector. Do you really want to hear me say these 3 words? The white crane flew off once more. The black dragon gazed at the place where the crane had vanished and suddenly gave a soft sigh. At this moment, there was no hint of arrogance on her face, no sneer of condescension, no ruthlessness. There was only a faint tinge of loneliness. At this moment, she was just an ordinary black-clothed girl watching her lover depart into the distance. A voice came from the celestial tree. Loneliness only needs one person, but loneliness needs 2, because it is the yearning that comes after separation. The little black dragon warily gazed over, and then she saw Su Yurong. Su Yurong calmly said to her, The problem is that he is my man, so how can you be lonely because of him? Chapter 175. The black dragon had never seen Su Yurong before, but she knew that this person was Su Yurong. The rumors were true. Su Yurong truly was very beautiful, and even she had to admit it. But she had not expected Su Yurong to say such a thing the first time they met. Those words might have sounded rather artistic, but how could she not hear the declaration hidden within? No, there was no concealment. Su Yurong had made no attempt to conceal anything, clearly declaring her ownership of Chun Changsheng. The rumored pure and holy maiden actually had such a strong possessive desire. The black dragon even thought of those vulgar and low-class female dragons on the southern islands and jeered, Do you want to pee on him? These words were truly vulgar, but Su Yurong did not get angry. She calmly said, Perhaps there are other ways to resolve it. The black dragon coldly stared at her. How do you want to resolve it? Su Yurong glanced at her ankle and indifferently said, I have no way of removing this seal in a short amount of time, and I also don't want him to always remember this matter and feel even more apologetic towards you. Thus, I've decided that in the future, I'll spend some time with you every day. This way, you won't be lonely, and you won't mistakenly think that loneliness is loneliness. The black dragon angrily retorted, I don't need your company. Just looking at you makes me annoyed. Su Yurong smiled. You're his protector, so I naturally have to take good care of you and thank you. The black dragon sneered. What does that have to do with you? He's my man. Su Yurong did not get angry at these words, nor did she argue. She stroked her black hair and smiled. Good girl. The black dragon was extremely depressed. She desperately shook her head, wanting to escape her grasp, but to no avail. Seeing her like this, Su Yurong happily said, How cute. The black dragon was infuriated and yelled, I'm going to eat you. Su Yurong smiled. It's fine as long as you don't think about eating him. The black dragon froze for a moment before understanding what she meant. Her face instantly blushed, and she spat. Woman, how could you be so shameless? My apologies, sir. I was unable to find the key. Luo raised her head and glanced at Chun Changsheng, somewhat uneasy. This was the highest stone hall in the imperial city. She had lived here the entire time in White Emperor City. Chun Changsheng wasn't surprised by this answer, but he was surprised by Luo's fear. In the Orthodox Academy, Luo had been just as adorable as she was now, but she would never reveal this sort of expression. What exactly happened? Or was it that Madame Mu wanted to marry her off to Shiwalao City, and this matter not only hurt her heart, but also made her very afraid? Luo glanced at the white crane outside the window. Looking at his expression, she asked cautiously, Will Shirmu be unhappy? Chun Changsheng was startled and asked, Why is she unhappy? He truly did not understand why Su Yurong was unhappy, nor did he understand why the little black dragon had said that there was something wrong with his head. Seeing his response, Luo relaxed a little, but she was still a little nervous. She asked tentatively, Sir, you won't blame me? Chun Changsheng remembered that when Luo left the capital, she told him in a letter that she lied to him. In reality, she was the same age as him, only a few months younger. Was she worried that he would blame her for this? Chun Changsheng was speechless. He turned to her and prepared to say something, but he froze. They had clearly been separated for 5 years, but Luolua's appearance was still the same, immature and adorable to the extreme, just like a child. What was going on here? Her cultivation level should not have reached this level. Or did the demi-human race also have a secret technique similar to South Stream temples to preserve one's appearance? Sir? Luoluo softly reminded him. Chen Chong Sheng came to his senses and said, I truly am a little angry. Luoluo nervously thought, could Sir have heard what Xin Yuanpa said? Or could it be that he heard what I said? Sir knows that I like him, so he's angry? Chen Chong Sheng asked, since you already heard the news, why didn't you write a letter to the Li Palace asking for reinforcements? I'm your teacher, so I naturally wouldn't abandon you. Luoluo froze at Chen Chongsheng's words, and then she felt extremely sweet. Yes, how could Sir leave me alone? At the most dangerous moment, he would assuredly break through the clouds and bring me away in golden light. But if I had told the Li Palace of this matter from the start, the human race might have other ways to deal with it. Sir, would you have personally come? Luoluo thought to herself, I have to hide my intentions from Sir, even if I have to hide it for the rest of my life. It would be wonderful if I could have a lifetime. Senior Byung Hong is about to leave. Chen Chongsheng's gloomy voice shattered her slightly sweet and sour thoughts. The meaning of leave was not to leave White Emperor City, but to leave the world. Luoluo was shocked, and then she became sad. This sadness was because of that senior she had never met, and also because of something else. An expert of the divine domain had been murdered and died in White Emperor City. In the end, an explanation had to be given for this matter. Was it truly time for the human race and the demi-human race to part? She had just reunited with Sir, but would it be difficult to meet him again? She grabbed Chen Chongsheng's belt, her small face brimming with hidden bitterness. Sir, I am not willing. Chen Chongsheng had failed to dodge, as her movements were as fast as lightning. Besides the increase in her cultivation, it was also because she had done this action countless times. Back in the Orthodox Academy, every time Chen Chongsheng drove her back to the Hunterherb Garden, or when she returned to the Li Palace or the Imperial Palace, she would use this method to stall for time. She also had an even more practiced action that could stall for even longer. She would lean over and hug Chen Chongsheng's thigh, but she was still a little older, so she was somewhat embarrassed to do this. Chen Chongsheng replied, It's not as serious as you think. It's just that since you've done something, you have to pay the price. If the human race did not pursue the death of an expert of the divine domain, White Emperor City would inevitably have to pay an extremely heavy price. His words were not explicit, but the target his sword was pointing at was extremely clear. Luoluo whispered, Mother, she's pregnant. This was telling Chen Chongsheng that Madame Mu's status would become even more stable, but correspondingly, her status and weight in the demi-human race would be greatly weakened. But it's fine. I will work hard. Luoluo cutely stuck out her tongue. What used to be a cheerful smile now looked so forced, even a little heavy. Chen Chongsheng felt a great deal of pity as he gazed at her small face. You don't need to do anything. Luoluo looked at him and very seriously said, Teacher, in truth, I have many supporters. I just thought that Sir would come to save me anyway, so I didn't do anything. Chen Chongsheng replied, Even if you could do many things, don't do them. Luoluo opened her eyes wide and asked, Why is that? Chen Chongsheng rubbed her head and said, Because she's your mother, and also because I happen to know that you like to stand at very high places. Luoluo truly did like to stand at high places like the great banyan tree by the lake in the Orthodox Academy, the Hall of Pure Virtue in the Li Palace, or this palace hall. Those who did not understand her would think that this most revered princess in the world liked to look down on others from high places. But Chen Chongsheng knew that this was not the case. Luoluo liked to stand at very high places because only there could she see very far away places. How can a girl who likes to see far away stay here to be empress? Chen Chongsheng earnestly said to her. Luoluo stared at him in a daze, then suddenly threw herself into his embrace and tightly hugged him. Her small face rubbed against his chest as she made happy noises. The noises were very soft, sometimes mewing, sometimes snoring. It sounded like a kitten that had just eaten its fill and had its fur stroked 800 times. An old comrade has released another new book, Chronicles of Rivers and Mountains and Beauties, Navigating the Tides, The Official Road Without Bounds. Author Ray Jin's new book, Beacon Emperor. It's a historical fantasy genre, rising from the wilderness, making a name for oneself on the battlefield, and sweeping through the imperial court. This book will give you a different kind of fantasy experience. http://book/10037793332. ASPX, to be continued. Chapter 176. Luo was very moved by Chen Chongqing's words. But in Chen Chongqing's view, this was a matter of course. Whether it was the demi-human empress or someone else, if you wanted to do it, then do it. If you didn't want to do it, then don't do it. It could not be influenced by any other factor, not even the future of the continent. When Tang 36 had said that he did not want to be head of the Tang clan, he had also taken this stance. Luo knew what he was thinking, but this matter of course made her even more moved. After some time, she reluctantly left his embrace. She looked at him and softly said, "I don't believe father will support mother's opinion." Chen Chongqing was quiet for a while, then said, "I also hope so, but I'm not too sure." Abandoning the alliance with the human race and allying with the demons was a turning point in history for the demi-human race and the entire continent. For the demi-human race's future, any choice the White Emperor made could be imagined. Based on Chen Chongqing's reasoning, there were some problems that were not easy to explain. For instance, when the Tianhai Divine Empress had shaken the entire continent, why had the White Emperor not been wary of the human race? It was because they had not been standing high enough and could not see far enough. At the time, the internal problems of the human race had not been resolved. Shang Xingzhou had been quietly watching the capital from the riverbank, and the Pope had been watching the imperial palace from the Li Palace with complex emotions. In those years, the White Emperor had secretly supported Shang Xingzhou, probably out of consideration for balancing the factions within the human race. Later on, the Tianhai Divine Empress died, and many experts of the human race died. This also meant that the human race no longer had any major internal conflicts. A unified will had always been the most frightening thing, and the demon race was now much weaker because of its internal strife. From every angle, the demi-human race seemed to have a natural need to ally with the demon race. Thus, Chen Chongqing could not make any firm judgments about the White Emperor's stance. It now seemed that the greatest hope for him and the human race lay in the opposition within the demi-human race. The mood in White Emperor City was extremely oppressive. Patrolling soldiers and somber beast guards could be seen everywhere. Quite a few of the usually bustling shops on the western side of the street were closed, and the populace rarely ventured out. It was abnormally quiet. Compared to the mood in the city, the vast plains on the two shores of the Red River were even more tense. Just like the wildfire beneath the celestial trees, it seemed like it could explode at any moment. The Blackstone army stationed at Wild Mountain Pass had a riot last night. Great Goblin General, she had only managed to stabilize the situation with great difficulty, and no major changes had occurred. Even the most disciplined and elite of the demi-human race, the Beast Cavalry, was somewhat shaken, not to mention the miscellaneous troops stationed in the mountains, as well as the large and small tribes. According to reports from various places, in a short span of 2 days, there had already been many bloody conflicts among the demon race army, and the various tribes had already begun to assemble their troops. This was the signal of war, the omen of a storm. What was about to happen was not a war with the demon race or the human race, but a war between the two major forces of the demon race. The entire demon race had already been clearly divided into two factions. Madame Mu represented the will of the imperial clan, and the council of elders represented by the Xiong clan leader supported the alliance with the demons. Standing on the opposite side was Luo's side. They had the prime minister as their representative civil official system and the support of many tribes. They hoped to maintain their friendship with the human race. The former's strength was greater than the latter's. But the problem was that the latter's attitude was very unyielding and had the strong support of the human race represented by Chun Changsheng. If Madame Mu wanted to forcefully announce the letter to the world, the demi-human race might really be plunged into civil war. No one was willing to see this sight. So before the conflict finally escalated, both the Xiang clan leader and the other demi-human personages first hoped to persuade the other side through negotiations. Thus, in the last 2 days, there were very few pedestrians on the streets of White Emperor City, while the residences of the elders and ministers were packed with guests. Even the imperial court had stopped. The two most lively places were the Xiang clan's estate and the Taoist church of the Western Wastes. The former was because the demon lord was probably still in that large courtyard extremely close to the Xiang clan's estate, currently under the Xiang clan's protection. The latter was because Chun Changsheng was living there. The Pope of the human race and the demon lord were in the same city, separated by 10 some li. This was a sight that had never before appeared in history. The atmosphere of the city naturally became unprecedentedly strange. Many tribal leaders, merchants, and officials entered the Xiang clan's estate, only to come out after some time. From their expressions, it was impossible to tell what had happened in the estate, what their discussions with the demon lord had been like, or even whether they had seen the demon lord. In short, everything seemed very mysterious. Chun Changsheng used an entire day to receive the representatives of the various factions. The Bear tribe leader and the Shi clan leader introduced the leaders of many small tribes to pay their respects. The Taoist Church of the Western Wastes was instantly overcrowded. When those 2 young Meng clan representatives entered the Taoist church and used the firmest of tones to express their support for the human race, Chun Changsheng was very shocked. It was not because they were too enthusiastic that made him suspicious, but because he recognized them. Many years ago, when he went from Xining village to the capital, wanting to enter the 6 Ivies, he had encountered a pair of hunter brothers from the Elder's Ridge. In the end, those hunter brothers successfully entered Star Caesar Academy and became glorious officers of the Great Zhou. He had never imagined that these hunter brothers were actually demi-humans. Now that he thought about it, this was naturally a collaboration between the Great Zhou army and the Meng clan. Back then, the principal of Star Caesar Academy, Chen Guansong, had been a truly extraordinary individual. It was no wonder that Shang Xingzhou believed him to be the best candidate for the next leader of the Great Zhou army. Alas, in the end, he had died in the Tianhai Divine Empress's final phoenix fire. His grand plans and schemes had all come to nothing, but fortunately, he had left behind some shade for his descendants. Deep in the night, the representatives and officials of the various races that had come to pay their respects to Chun Changsheng withdrew from the Taoist Church of the Western Wastes, leaving only the most important personages behind. They were now the staunchest representatives of the human race's allies. The events of the day had filled them with even more confidence, but there were still some matters that made them very uneasy. If His Majesty leaves seclusion, he can decide everything with a single word. Even if he is injured and needs to quietly cultivate, how can he not appear in the face of such a major event? The Prime Minister fell quiet for a very long time in response to the Bear Tribe leader's questions, and then he said this. In the last few years, no one has personally seen His Majesty, not even I. A few days ago, the Chief Elder went to sense His Majesty's spiritual sense. The Shi clan leader expressionlessly said, Old Xiang is the most patient and most forbearing person I have ever seen in my life. No matter how I think about it, I cannot understand why he would jump out this time. Moreover, all the tribes along the 2 shores of the Red River know that his relationship with the Empress is not very good. Just because of a strand of His Majesty's spiritual sense, he changed? If he really is one of the Empress's people, who can be sure that he wasn't lying that night? After listening to this extremely quiet discussion, Chun Changsheng fell quiet for a very long time. He knew that these demi-human personages were using this method to remind him, to warn him. But this matter was far too inconceivable. So even though there was no one around, they only dared to use these vague and ambiguous words to mention it. No matter what it is, You have to see it with your own eyes in order to judge whether it's true or false. I do not want the demi-human race to start a civil war, but the present situation must be broken as quickly as possible." After a pause, Chun Changsheng said, "I will go see His Majesty the White Emperor." Chapter 177. There were no clouds in the night sky, only stars scattered everywhere like sesame seeds. There seemed to be no pattern to them, and they were smooth and uniform in every direction. Chun Changsheng stood by the window and looked at the starry sky that was indeed closer than the ground. He repeated the previous conversation. Luo Luo stood at his side, her left hand grabbing his sleeve out of habit. She tilted her head and thought for a moment before saying, "Then let's go see him." Chun Changsheng glanced at her and said, "This matter needs to be done in secret. Your mother can't find out." The Sher clan leader had already drawn the rough location of Emperor Bai's seclusion on the map and handed it over to him. If he wanted to go there, he had to go through a secret passage in the palace. In his view, although Luluo was a noble princess, under Madame Mu's deliberate suppression, she should not have much control over the imperial city. Luo Luo blinked her eyes and said seriously, "Sir, don't worry. I'm your student. I'm capable of doing these things." Qin Changsheng felt that these words had the flavor of Su Li or Tang 36, and he couldn't help but laugh. Walking out from the damp and dark but not cold stone path, on the contrary, it was stuffy and hot. A snowy mountain along with the morning light entered Chun Changsheng's eyes. The snowy mountain was thousands of feet high. Below were black cliffs and primeval forests. The top half of the mountain was completely covered in white snow. Under the morning light, it glowed with a dazzling light. It rose abruptly from the lakeside and extended towards the north. It was impossible to see the end of it. It even made people wonder whether it would continue to the end of the world. It seemed extremely majestic, like a miracle. Chun Changsheng knew that this snowy mountain that stretched for countless miles was the Starfall Mountains that were often mentioned in ancient records. The Starfall Mountains grew along the western coast and suddenly protruded out of the earth to the north of White Emperor City. To the left, 100-some li was the ocean, its peaks covered in snow that had accumulated for tens of thousands of years. The mountain range also stretched for tens of thousands of li all the way to the extreme north. In the middle was a relatively flat plain known as Zhangling. After traveling southeast for 10-some days and nights, they arrived at the westernmost Song Province Army headquarters. Between Zhangling and the Song Province Army headquarters was a grassland that was the homeland of the elves. Now, it belonged to Chun Changsheng and Su Yurong. Chun Changsheng walked to the lakeside and looked at the opposite mountain range. He recalled the records in the Daoist canon that the Red River had originated from one of these snowy peaks, and then he recalled the connection between him and that plain, and he felt a strange sensation. Ever since the demi-human race established their kingdom on the Red River, countless generations of white emperors and empresses have been buried in the Starfall Mountains. According to the rules of the ancestral spirits, in order to prevent evildoers from peeking at the remains of the great Yao and the remnants of its true blood, the successive white emperors had never built a tomb in the mountains. They would only wait until the end of their lifespans before they would follow the secret path that Qin Changsheng had taken and arrive in the mountains. They would randomly choose a place to close their eyes and return their souls to the sea of stars. Of course, other than when they were on the verge of death, the successive white emperors would often come to the Starfall Mountains to pay their respect to their ancestors, to enjoy the scenery, or to search for opportunities to break into the next realm. Naturally, it was unavoidable that they would build buildings for resting in these snowy peaks. It was just that these buildings were surrounded by extremely powerful seals, making it extremely difficult for anyone other than the White Emperor to enter. The current White Emperor and the Demon Lord engaged in a heaven-shaking battle on the snowy plains to the north of Mount Han. The Demon Lord was heavily injured, and then Black Robe and the Demon Commander worked together to overthrow him. The White Emperor's injuries were also extremely severe. In the last few years, he had secluded himself in the Starfall Mountains. Other than Madame Mu and the Xiang clan leader, very few people knew where he was. Qin Changsheng had the map provided by the Shi clan leader, so he naturally did not lose his way. Using the Yesher step to tread on the snow, he quickly found the place. In front of two extremely verdant and ancient pines was a large black cliff. The cliff was covered in ice and snow that had not melted for tens of thousands of years. It looked extremely cold and lifeless, with nothing out of the ordinary about it. The area indicated on the map was very vast. Qin Changsheng did not know where the entrance was, so he could only spread his spiritual sense in all directions. However, he discovered that a barrier had appeared in front of him. This barrier was like a cushion of air, cutting off his spiritual sense, but it actually calmed his mind because he had confirmed that this was the place. Hidden beneath the black cliff and the frigid ice and snow was an array. After sensing it for a few moments, he discovered the formidable aspects of this array. This array probably originated from the same source as the Tang Palace array in the capital's imperial palace. It was both strict and dangerous, and contained its own mysteries between life and death. However, perhaps because it had absorbed too much qi from the snowy peaks and cold lakes, this array was even colder and more callous than the Tang Palace. It faintly exuded a somber aura, but also an extremely powerful qi of the imperial clan. If this array was activated, it would probably be no less powerful than the seal of the Red River. Of course, compared to the imperial design of the capital, it was still much weaker. 2 days ago, when Qin Changsheng broke the seal of the Red River, he had consumed too much of the light energy in the divine staff of the orthodoxy and could not use it again. So what method could he use to break the array? Since there were arrays in the world, there was naturally a corresponding method to break them. Qin Changsheng was well-versed in the Taoist canon, and after cultivating, he had also studied arrays, but he was still not skilled in this Tao. After studying it for a very long time, he could only think of one possibility. As he gazed at the black cliff of ice, he once more felt that strange feeling in his heart. If he had not mistaken her for an elf girl, would they have been together even earlier? If on that day on the banks of the Tong River, he had patiently waited for half a day after reading the letter, would she have come with him on a crane? If she were here, would she be able to see the flaw in this array with just a glance? With a clang, several dozen swords appeared in the sky. An incomparably awe-inspiring sword intent spread out in all directions from Qin Changsheng's body, instantly chopping apart the countless snowflakes drifting down. Qin Changsheng gripped the stainless sword and warily gazed at a protrusion at the very bottom of the black cliff. The snowflakes drifting down came from the ice and snow above the black cliff. This was because the cliff had been shaken as clearly as his feet could feel. The protrusion at the bottom of the black cliff suddenly split open and 2 people climbed out. The several dozen swords trembled and let out a frightening hum, but they did not attack because Qin Changsheng recognized the identities of these 2 people. These 2 people were Jin Yulu and Xiao Da. Jin Yulu had once been the gatekeeper of the Orthodox Academy and had helped Qin Changsheng resolve many problems. Although they had not met for many years, their friendship still existed. Although Xiao Da and Qin Changsheng were enemies, he had always had a close relationship with the human race. In the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, he and Xiao Zhang had forced their way into the imperial palace and helped the Tang's second master seize control of the imperial design. One could imagine that he had been Shang Xingzhou's collaborator at the time. The resolute attitude the Shi clan leader had displayed in the heavenly selection ceremony and in the following 2 days also proved this point. Qin Changsheng naturally would not attack them, but he had not expected them to emerge from the black cliff. If the White Emperor really was in secluded cultivation in the depths of the cliff, had they seen him? At this moment, not even he knew which answer he wanted to hear, because none of them seemed good. To be continued. Chapter 178. Jin Yulu was still wearing that embroidered robe covered in copper coins, looking like a wealthy man. However, he was now in a rather sorry state, his body covered in mud and stone fragments. Xiaoda's appearance was even worse. His clothes were covered in yellow mud, a color even deeper than the ruthless yellow in his eyes, more like some sort of filth. Seeing Chun Chongsheng standing outside the cliff, Jin Yu Lu was very shocked, but soon after, a gratified expression appeared on his face. He did not need to think to know that Chun Chongsheng had appeared because of Luoluo. Xiaoda looked at Chun Chongsheng with a somewhat complicated gaze. In the last few years, he had often unconsciously acted in accordance with Chun Chongsheng's style. In other words, he was learning from the opponent he had once hated the most. Now that he had suddenly met him, someone as proud as him could not help but feel somewhat awkward. Jin Yu Lu asked, "Your Holiness the Pope has also come to see His Majesty?" Chun Chongsheng nodded and asked, "Did you see him?" Jin Yu Lu shook his head, seeming particularly tired. "I knew it was inside, but I couldn't get in no matter what." Chun Chongsheng was quiet for a while, then asked, "Is the sage well?" Jin Yu Lu replied, "I haven't seen him, so I don't know." A wary expression appeared on Xiaoda's face. Chun Chongsheng said to him, "The Shi clan leader told me of this position." Xiaoda understood the hidden meaning in these words and said, "Then it's up to you now." The Shi clan leader had always been renowned for his intelligence and caution. If he were not certain that Xiaoda could not succeed, he would never have told Chun Chongsheng the location of the White Emperor's seclusion. Chun Chongsheng gazed at the black cliff, sensing the power of the ceiling array, and slightly arched his brows. If he wanted to resolve all the problems at hand, he first had to determine the situation within the black cliff. This was what Chun Chongsheng thought. This was what the Shi clan leader thought. Xiaoda also thought, so he withdrew from the heavenly selection ceremony that he had planned for so many years, came to the black cliff, and began to dig a hole. Jin Yu Lu also thought this way. He had come earlier than Xiaoda and dug even faster. By now, Xiaoda had been digging for 2 days and 2 nights without rest, while Jin Yu Lu had been digging for 4 days and 4 nights. Chun Chongsheng had been prepared to use the method of forcefully breaking through the cliff to get past the seal. This method of relying purely on strength seemed crude, even idiotic, but it was often the correct choice. Experts like Xiaoda and Jin Yu Lu naturally understood this principle. Unfortunately, they still failed. There was no need for Chun Chongsheng to try again, but he wanted to go in and take a look. The entrance to the cave was on the surface of the black cliff, but it wasn't straight. Instead, it slanted upwards until it reached the deepest part of the cliff. Chun Chongsheng followed Jin Yu Lu and Xiaoda for a very long time before reaching the end. Looking at the clear and deep claw marks on the cave walls, feeling the remaining violent aura, he seemed to see what had really happened in the past few days. Jin Yu Lu and Xiaoda had entered a berserk state, their mountainous bodies madly attacking the hard cliff. Occasionally, the silhouettes of massive lions and leopards would appear in the dark cave. Soon, he noticed something strange about the cave walls. The stone wall in front of him was very smooth, like a piece of jade. There were no cracks, not even dirt. Jin Yu Lu said, "We've tried changing directions several times, but we couldn't get around this stone wall. This means that this place is the living pivot of the formation." Chun Chongsheng asked, "What is this stone wall itself?" Jin Yu Lu replied, "It should be the legendary star stone. It has a weight countless times greater than its volume. Even an expert of the divine domain would find it very difficult to move." Hearing the name Star Stone, Chun Chongsheng recalled the treasure of the orthodoxy that Taoist Baishir had once held. After a moment of silence, he stepped forward and fiercely slashed at the stone wall with the stainless sword. There was a clang. The stainless sword was as bright and sharp as ever, undamaged, but it had only left behind a very faint mark on the stone wall. If he wanted to use the stainless sword to cut through this stone wall, he would have to spend many days. Chun Chongsheng was somewhat disappointed, but he didn't know that Jin Yu Lu and Xiaoda were both shocked by this sight. Besides its unimaginable density and weight, Star Stone was also famous for its toughness. Jin Yu Lu and Xiaoda had tried many times, but whether it was the claws of their true form in the berserk state or the high-level magical artifacts they carried with them, none of them could leave a single mark on the surface of Star Stone. A casual swing of Chun Chongsheng's sword had managed to cut a small hole in the stone wall. Just how sharp was this sword? Xiaoda had clashed with Chun Chongsheng's sword in the alley of the Northern Military Department. At the time, He had not felt that Chun Changsheng's sword was this frightening, but he soon realized that this was probably because Chun Changsheng's cultivation in the path of the sword had greatly increased in the last few years. Chun Changsheng asked, "Since it's a sealing array, someone should have laid it down. Who could place such a heavy stone wall in the position of the living pivot of heavenly secrets?" Jin Yu Lu replied, "It was probably the empress who used the power of the tides to push the star stone to seal this place." Xiaoda suddenly said, "Star stones can absorb star radiance." Chen Changsheng was somewhat confused as to why he had suddenly said this, but he soon understood, and his expression turned rather grave. Star radiance was not starlight, but an invisible energy extracted from the swaying of the invisible line between the distant star and the cultivator. The true essence in the body of a cultivator was also star radiance, and not even a saint could escape this category. If the stone wall could endlessly absorb star radiance, it also meant that it could absorb the White Emperor's true essence. Even if the White Emperor had an unfathomable cultivation and did not care about the interference of the star stone, he was still quietly recuperating in the depths of the Black Cliff. Why would he add more trouble to Chun Changsheng's troubles? All these clues ultimately pointed to one possibility. Whether it's the heavenly selection ceremony or the alliance with the demons, it turns out that it has nothing to do with us demi-humans, but the ambitions of the great Western continent. If His Majesty has already returned to the Sea of Stars. In a very short time, Jin Yu Lu had aged a great deal, his voice beginning to tremble. This was not a very likely possibility. When an expert of the divine domain returned to the Sea of Stars, the entire continent would sense it. This was a heavenly omen. When the blue-clothed visitor had just died, Madame Mu, who was 80,000 li away, had learned of the news. When plotting against Bianghong and Wuqiongbai, Madame Mu had first activated the seal of the Red River for this very reason. And the White Emperor was a saint of this generation. If he really did return to the Sea of Stars, no matter how powerful the seal was, it would not be able to block the news, and the world would assuredly quake. Xiaoda solemnly said, "Even if His Majesty is fine, the situation is still very dangerous. In the battle with the Demon Lord, His Majesty suffered extremely heavy injuries, and now that the Empress has used this method, not only has His Majesty's injuries not improved, they are only worsening by the day. If a few more days pass, the worst might really occur." When they thought of this possibility, Jin Yu Lu and Xiaoda both grimaced, but Qin Changsheng was much calmer. Just as he had thought before entering the Black Cliff, the White Emperor's death or survival was extremely bad news for the human race. If it was the former, it meant that there was no one in the demi-human race that could suppress Madame Mu's ambitions. If it was the latter, it meant that the White Emperor truly did share Madame Mu's thoughts, that he wanted to ally with the demons. With a saint like this watching from the shadows, what else could he do? Now, he speculated that the White Emperor was heavily injured, imprisoned, and weakened by Madame Mu's methods. This situation was actually the best. This meant that the Xiang clan leader had been pretending to have the White Emperor's decree that night. In reality, the White Emperor still supported the human race. In that case, as long as he was rescued, everything would be easily solved. At this moment, an extremely bright and clear cry of a crane came from outside the cave. Chun Changsheng emerged from the cave, took down the paper, and read it, his expression turning extremely solemn. The white crane had brought two pieces of news. One was good news, one was bad news. Xin Yuan had awakened, while Biang Hong had fallen unconscious. To be continued. Chapter 179. After receiving the letter, Chun Changsheng said a few words to Jin Yu Lu and Xiao De before riding off on the crane. Jin Yu Lu and Xiao De glanced at each other, seeing the doubt and unease in each other's eyes. Before Chun Changsheng left, he said that he was going to take care of something and that he would return once he was done. In the end, he said that he hoped that the matter would not be finished. These words were very strange and incomprehensible. Just what sort of matter was it that was more important than helping the White Emperor escape? On a snowy peak 10-some li away from the Black Cliff, the drifting snow and white clothes seemed to fuse together. Su Yurong had already been standing here for some time. She had watched Chen Changsheng, Jin Yulu, and Xiao to enter the Black Cliff, watched the White Crane arrive, and then Chen Changsheng leave. She had vaguely guessed at what had happened in White Emperor City, and her mood had also been somewhat affected. She had already observed the sealing array of the Black Cliff for a long enough time to find a way to break it. She took out a white paper from her sleeve and folded it into a crane, then let it go. The paper crane flew with the wind, drifting to the Black Cliff and then landing on the ground. Xiao warily looked around, but found nothing. He picked up the paper crane and opened it. He saw 2 words written on the paper, the handwriting graceful and probably written by a woman. The 2 words were sorcerer. With Su Yurong's speed, it took only a very short amount of time to return from the Starfall Mountains to White Emperor City. She did not go to the small courtyard behind the temple to the Celestial Tree because she still did not want to meet with Chen Changsheng, and also because she subconsciously did not want to see those scenes. When she returned to the inn from yesterday, she did not return her room. Instead, she went to the front hall and ordered the inn's most famous jiatong buns. The atmosphere in White Emperor City was tense and strange. There were not many pedestrians on the streets, so the inn's business was naturally poor. Very few people had the leisure to come here for breakfast. The diners who still wanted to eat at a time like this were assuredly the truly lively idlers, and lively idlers were naturally good at gossiping. As Su Yurong ate her beef and egg porridge and her buns, she listened in on the gossip of the guests at the neighboring tables. Recently, the greatest excitement in White Emperor City had naturally been the heavenly selection ceremony and the successive appearances of the Demon Lord and Chen Changsheng. As for the most heated gossip, it was naturally the words that Xin Yuanpa had shouted in front of the Imperial City. It was also the words that Princess Luoluo had personally admitted. She did not know what the Pope was thinking, but seeing that he did not care about the long journey, rode a crane, and said those words, "He should like Her Highness, right? I heard that the human race is very afraid of this kind of thing, but when did our demon race care about this? If you like it, then let's sleep together. I've heard that His Holiness the Pope and the Holy Maiden are engaged, but when has our demi-human race ever cared about such things? They could just snatch it. If they really couldn't snatch it, they could sleep together." Su Yurong's mood was originally a little down. She had heard a stomach full of gossip during the meal, so she wasn't full at all, which made her mood even worse. The so-called brightly lit Tao heart that was calm like water had long since been forgotten by her. She took a steamed bun and a plate of vinegar garlic and returned to her room. She simply washed up and sat in front of the table. Looking at herself in the bronze mirror, she began to be lost in thought. The reflection in the mirror was not very clear, rather blurry, but the face in the mirror was still beautiful, like the most beautiful flower the world could imagine. I'm her teacher. If I say she can't marry, she can't marry. It was truly a domineering statement. What a good relationship between teacher and student. She thought mockingly. She was keenly aware that to Chen Changsheng, the little black dragon represented a favor that he would definitely repay for the rest of his life. The truly troublesome one was still Luoluo. No matter how one looked at it, Luoluo was the type of girl that men most liked, not to mention that her love for Chen Changsheng was so clean and undemanding. She could not do this, could not love Chen Changsheng more than herself. She couldn't even understand how someone could do it. She only knew that if she wanted to walk the long 1,000 years of cultivation with Chen Changsheng, she would have to face the greatest challenge. The more she thought about it, the more unhappy she became. She pouted, revealing the attitude of a little girl that she had never seen in the outside world. She looked at herself in the mirror and snorted. "You're so beautiful. You're the most beautiful girl in the world. It's not like he's blind." After saying this, she suddenly came to her senses. Feeling very ashamed, she let out a groan and covered her face. At this moment, a thin layer of mist suddenly appeared in the mirror. Su Yurong's expression froze, but she quickly regained her composure. There was no longer any anger or embarrassment in her eyes, only calm and beautiful. At this moment, she was the Holy Maiden, her temperament like a spring forest after a fresh rain. The mist in the mirror gradually changed, condensing into thick and thin lines. One could faintly make out the shape of a face. The image was still blurry, making it impossible to see the features, but for some reason, that face seemed incredibly handsome and exuded a temperament like that of a high mountain. Su Yurong looked at the man in the mirror and said, "I personally went to see the seal. Since the White Emperor is still alive, he should be able to come out. At the very least, he should be able to send a message." Hearing these words, the man in the mirror was silent for a long time. It was clear that these seemingly ordinary words had some impact on his mind. Su Yurong asked no questions, only quietly waited. The man sighed, indescribably sorrowful, even somewhat sorrowful. He said, "Since it's like this, let's help him come out." Su Yurong said, "I've already sent a message to Chun Changsheng. With his comprehension, he should be able to very quickly break the seal." The man said, "Since it's like this, all of you must be more cautious." Su Yurong suddenly asked, "Why is he willing to help you when you have no other methods? In the current situation, you have many opportunities to kill him." The man instead asked, "Then why are you willing to help me?" Su Yurong replied, "The greater picture is more important." The man calmly said, "It's the same principle. So he's not helping me, and I don't care about him. Killing him, there will be many more opportunities in the future." Su Yurong finally asked, "On Sir B's side, is there really no other method?" The man thought it over, then replied, "If not even that evil disciple can cure him, then there's nothing." The greater picture was naturally how the human race could continue to exist on this continent and multiply without end. Su Yurong had to consider this problem, the person in the copper mirror had to consider this problem, and Chun Changsheng, as the current pope of the human race, naturally had to consider this problem, even though he believed that he did not have the ability. There were many things that he did not have the ability to resolve. Even a medical path that he was most skilled in seemed to be completely useless at certain times. The white crane flew through the great trees of the celestial tree temple and landed in the ruined courtyard. Xinyuan Po's face was pale, and his right arm hung limply by his side. When he saw Chun Changsheng, he barely managed to squeeze out a smile. Chun Changsheng went up and hugged him. After patting him 3 times on the back, he said nothing more and walked into the room. Byong Hong leaned against the wall, his eyes closed, his expression normal, as if he was sleeping. Chun Changsheng silently walked up to him, took the needles from his finger, and began to treat him once more. It was said that his cinnabar pill could regrow bones and revive the dead, but that was actually just an exaggerated rumor. The cinnabar pill contained the blood of the sacred blood, could only treat external wounds like blood loss, broken bones, or ruptured abdomens. Byong Hong's injuries were caused by the 2 angels from the sacred light continent. His soul and body had suffered irreversible injuries that were simply impossible to treat. After some time, Chun Changsheng's Taoist robe was completely drenched in sweat. Fortunately, after the Tianhai Divine Empress had reconstructed his meridians, the strange fragrance that could drive the entire world mad was no longer present. Byong Hong slowly opened his eyes, finally waking up. Chun Changsheng once more saw that gloomy, gray-tinged qi in the depths of his eyes. This qi was extremely faint, like the fresh snow falling from a snowy plain, the raindrops falling from a mountain stream. If one did not possess an extremely powerful spiritual sense like his, they would have found it utterly impossible to notice. This qi was the will of death. To be continued. Chapter 180. 2 days had passed, and Madame Mu had probably already discovered from certain details that Byong Hong and Wu Qiongbai were still alive and in this small courtyard. But presumably, she would not act against Byong Hong and Wu Qiongbai, because Chun Changsheng was already here and the rift within the demi-human race was already extremely deep. Only if she truly began to go crazy and no longer cared that the demi-human race would be burned to ashes in the flames of civil war. The wind from the river rustled the leaves in the temple of the celestial tree, which then fell into the quiet courtyard. The rustling was very clear. Such a quiet moment was extremely suitable for chatting or handing over a few things. Especially at this moment, when Byong Hong had used some method to make Wu Qiongbai fall asleep. Chun Changsheng asked, "What does Senior wish to leave behind?" Or what do you want us to do? Byung Hong replied. In the past, I believed that I would leave behind a descendant, but since there is none now, there is no need to say anything. When he said this, his expression was very calm, and his tone was also very indifferent, but anyone could hear the deep pain hidden in it. An expert of the continent, on his deathbed with no one to send him off, to see his son die early, anyone would find it very difficult to accept. Chun Changshang said, "It is also good to leave behind some of Senior's thoughts for the common people." Many people knew that Byung Hong was a scholar from Shilling's 10,000 Years Pavilion, but his life experiences and cultivation had always been a mystery. Just what aspect of my past does the common people want to know the most? Byung Hong glanced at Wu Qiongbai and sighed. It's probably why you married her. Chun Changshang thought this over, then very honestly said, there truly are many people who don't understand. Although no one has ever dared to mention this matter to us husband and wife, I know that this sort of gossip has always existed in many taverns and inns. There have even been some storytellers who helped us think of many bizarre stories, imagined many scenarios for me. The bee in those stories truly suffered an extremely tragic fate, and even I felt very sympathetic when I heard it. Byung Hong smiled and continued, it's all fake. There are so many things in life that have no choice, much less someone like me. Chun Changshang thought to himself that this was indeed the case. An expert of the divine domain possessed unimaginable power and authority, not much different from an emperor. How could they possibly endure for so many years because they had no other choice? Byung Hong explained, this story is really much simpler than all of you think. When I was young, my family was poor. My master took me in and raised me. I grew up together with my junior sister. She respected and loved me, never doing anything that made me unhappy. I naturally also loved and pitied her. When I was a little older, I naturally married her. Chen Shang didn't expect the story to be so simple. Byung Hong added, although she truly was not like this when I married her, if I think about it carefully, isn't this also my fault? Chun Shang said, if this is true, then Senior's arrogance toward her is indeed equivalent to indulging her in evil. Byung Hong replied, so I'm not a gentleman, nor am I a good person. Chun Changsheng still couldn't accept it and said, I still don't think this is right. Byung Hong looked at him and said, if your wife treated you extremely well, but had an extremely bad personality and was even a great evil and wicked person, what would you do? This question seemed very easy to answer, but it was extremely complicated upon further thought. Chen Changsheng had never thought about such matters before, so he naturally didn't know the answer. Wu Qiongbai happened to wake up at this moment. When she heard these words, she naturally believed that Byung Hong was talking about her. She instantly became angry and cursed. I just killed a few pieces of trash that disrespected their elders. But do you think I'm a great evil and wicked person? You heartless thing. The silence in the courtyard was instantly shattered, everything seeming to be thrown into disarray. Byung Hong did not explain. He looked at her and said with extreme seriousness and gentleness, in the future, don't do this sort of thing, all right? Just like the day before yesterday, Wu Qiongbai once more panicked. She mumbled, didn't I already promise you? Why keep bringing this up? Byung Hong smiled at her and said, junior sister, I'm very sorry that I can no longer accompany you. Wu Qiongbai became even more panicked. She grabbed his clothes and shrieked, what nonsense are you saying? Byung Hong sighed and said, I'm not speaking nonsense. Wu Qiongbay's face paled. Her nervousness made her tongue-tied, her words somewhat stuttering. But you still can't speak nonsense. Byung Hong replied, I'm not speaking nonsense. Wu Qiongbai yelled in absolute terror. I forbid you from leaving, or else I'll cut off Guanbai's hand as well. Or else, I'll throw myself in with the demons. I once thought of asking His Holiness to take me away and only leave you with the letter of divorce. But I know that you've definitely guessed that I'm dead, so it's better to just say it. Byung Hong tenderly caressed her face and said, because you know that I won't abandon you. Xin Yuan stood by the door, constantly wiping his tears with his sleeve, but he couldn't wipe them clean. He didn't really understand these things, but he felt that his senior's words were rather heart-wrenching. Can I trouble you to buy a few steamed buns? Byung Hong somewhat embarrassedly said to him. I want to eat the beef and onion filling. Startled, Xin Yuanpa hurriedly ran out of the small courtyard, completely disregarding the fact that he had only just recovered from his heavy injuries and was still incredibly weak. In the morning mist and steam, he ran back to the Hu Bun store, brimming with regret. He thought, why didn't I see that Senior wanted to eat beef buns a few days ago? Xin Yuanpa carried a tray of steamed buns back to the small courtyard, escorted by 10-some priests and experts of the bear tribe. The tray of steamed buns was still scalding hot. If one tore off the soft skin, one could smell the aroma of beef, onion, and chili oil. Alas, it was a little too late. Byung Hong's eyes were closed, no longer breathing. Xin Yuanpa froze. The steam from a steamer in his bosom drifted up into the gloomy sky, also falling on his face. It was somewhat hot, somewhat wet. Chen Changsheng silently lowered his head, his fingers trembling at his side, the sword in his sheath vibrating with them. Xin Yuanpa kneeled in front of Byung Hong, placed a tray of steamed buns in front of him, and then respectfully kowtowed several times, tears streaming down his face. Wu Qiongbai noticed nothing. She stared in a daze at Byung Hong, her eyes gradually growing lax and her body swaying. Dang, 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 dang. A bell rang out from the celestial tree temple. Wu Qiongbai came to her senses, her eyes reddening and her lips trembling. She finally understood what had happened. A mournful sob resounded from the small courtyard. Chen Changsheng walked out of the courtyard. As he listened to the bell from the celestial tree temple, he recalled the night before Archbishop Mei Lisha died. On that night, the capital had also heard the sound of a bell. Was the bell really the signal to return home? Was the Sea of Stars really the homeland of all souls? Whether noble or lowly, beautiful or ugly. Just like a sob, no matter how unpleasant it was to hear, was it still so sorrowful? It's been a long time since I've chatted. Today, I thought about it again. I actually have many things I want to say to everyone, but I decided not to. Reading is fine. I wish everyone well. To be continued.